Everybody heard the recording lady? Okay, so second here, I have to put this into. Okay, so this is Shiur number 15 out of 16 in Bosor, which means we have this week where we're doing Mitzvah Shem Siman Sadik Vov, and then next week we make a Siyum, and then we will have Bez Hashem 3 Shiurim of Chazara. But as far as actually learning the actual Simonim, so this is the next to last one. And Siman Sadik Vov is all about Dover Charif. And although I told you that Nat Bar Nat is from all of the subjects that you're learning in Bosor B'Cholov is the most applicable, although that might be true, but to really mess up a kitchen and treif things up, probably Dover Charif is a more common problem. Because when you're dealing with Nat Bar Nat, as we did in Santa case, you have Nat Bar Nat, and you have Eina Ben Yemei, and you have different sorts of Haterim. Remember, students in seminary used to come, Rabbi Berel, they were in apartments, or a whole kitchen of treif. So I said, you have to really work hard to make a whole kitchen treif. Because this is Eina Ben Yemei, it doesn't ask b'di'evet. But when you hit Dover Charif, so all the rules change. There's no more Nat Bar Nat. Lamaisa, there's no more Ben Yemei. So it has an almost limitless ability to cause havoc in a kitchen. So that is the subject for today. So I'll mention this maybe at the end of the shiur also, but there is a sefer called Dover Charif. Sefer Dover Charif, Bosor B'Cholov, Beser V'Heter. Over 500 pages. And when I first saw the sefer, I said, a whole sefer Dover Charif. But I had experience when it comes to specialized topics like this, that if I didn't buy it, I ended up regretting it. And this sefer is very, very well used by me, all different sorts of shaylas, and although it's easy to be machmir and everything, sometimes you have big cases of hefsed, and you have all the days. And you see over here, it's a beheter, tevel, trumas ha'maisres, posel b'dogim, kavush, tigun, all different sorts of machinery for cutting things. What are the different hagdoras and all of these things? So it's very, we'll speak about some of the common cases. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end of the shiur to discuss it. Okay, so in order to properly understand this, like most of the simonim we had before, it's important to go back to the Gemara. If you get clear, I've said this a number of times, but just to repeat it, you get clear a few lines of Gemara. It's not dapim and dapim of Gemara. You got a few lines of Gemara straight, and then you say, oh, that's where the machlekes comes from. And so too over here, we have two Gemaras that we're going to present that speak about Dover Charif. One is in Chulin, Kuf Yud Aleph, Kuf Yud Beis, and the other one is in Avodah Zarah. Okay, this what you have on your screen is the Gemara in Chulin, and it's going to speak about Tsnein, which is radishes, and Selek, Silka, which we don't know exactly what that is today. The modern word is used for beets, but beets are not particularly charif, so it seems it was a different type of vegetable. And then the Gemara in Avodah Zarah is going to talk about chiltis. It's a Mishnah in Masechta Avodah Zarah, and it's Avodah Zarah Lamates. Okay, that's just the general two sugyas and how the basic machlekes rishenim regarding how we understand these three different types of vegetables, is going to determine the whole machlekes mechaber among what we do halacha l'maisa. So it's worth putting in a few minutes to understand it. Now, this Gemara should look very familiar to us because it's the end of the Gemara that we learned regarding nat bar nat, the machlekes Rav and Shmuel, about whether nat bar nat is asur or mutter, that we learned at the beginning of Siman Tzaddik. And the very end of that sugya, Omer Chizkiya Mishum Abaya, Hilchasa, Dogim Shola Bakaira, Mutter Lachem Bakutach. Finished. And that's the Dogim Shola Bakaira. Remember, we had a machlekes. What does it mean? Olu? Does it mean that it was just taken and put into the keli? Does it mean bishul? Does it mean sli? Well, the big machlekes rishenim over there. But whatever it is, it's a case of not banat, because the Dogim Shola Bakaira, the kaira was used for Bosor. So you had tam Bosor went into the kaira is tam number one, and then from the kaira into the dogim is tam number two. It's not bar not the latera. So since it's not bar not latera, Chizkiya says modlal chambakutach. So why does the Ramah say aser not bar not? Because the question is it only olu or is it also was bishul? And we had the whole discussion in the beginning of Tzaddik. Fine. But we see from here that not bar not, according to the Gemara, at least if it's dog shola bakaira, is mutter, and nobody argues with that. That we see even the Ramah is machmir l'gabe not bar not, but if it's all bakaira mamish, and there was no bishul, no tzli, the Ramah also is allowing it. However, shnein shachotchu b'sakin, shachotach b'basar, or b'kotach. So you have now a knife that was used to cut meat. Obviously, it was hot, otherwise there'd be no tam. So you have tam number one from the bosor into the knife, and now you cut with it a radish. The radish is also part. So you have tam number two going from the knife into the tznein. L'chora should be exactly like the previous line. It's just like dog mashola b'kaira, but instead of a kaira, it's a sakin, and instead of dogim, it's tznein. What's the din? The opposite. But it's not any vegetable. This only applies to radishes, the agav churfei bola. That because of its chrifus, because of its sharpness, it absorbed. Aval kishas, but if it's another type of vegetable kishas, not important exactly what it is. We don't really have a good identifying, final identification for it anyway. That you do greater. Remember all the way back at the beginning that we differentiated between hadacha, greira, klippa, and natila. Hadacha, you rinse it. Greira, you scrape off the surface. Klippa, you also take off the surface, but it has to be a little bit thicker. It goes off all in one piece. And that's, by the way, the end of Siman Tzaddik Vav. Both Shach and Taz quote Aran, who gives that definition, the difference between greira and klippa. And then natila is thicker than klifa, that you're taking off the width of a finger, which is 2 centimeters. You have to cut off 2 centimeters. In any case, so kishis, gadol bepiske, that you scrape off the place that it was cut, and then you're allowed to eat it. And then it goes for the kilcha, the lift the shari. This lephis is going to come back at the end of the siman also, but for the purposes of the Gemara, that it's something which is not sharp. But the silk asiri, but silk is also davar chari. And that last line we'll come back to at the end of the 7 minutes of Shem. So we see from this Gemara is that there's no not by a davar chari. And what's the davar chari we're talking about? We're talking about snain and selik. Those are the two cases we're talking about. So here you have radishes on the right, and you have some I guess selik, whatever it is, on the left. And the question is, before we get to this, just another reminder when we learned before about a sakin. So we had duchga the skina before. In fact, we mentioned over charif also before. A sakin is unique in 2 different ways. First of all, it's assumed normally that a knife has some shamnunis on it. Knives are hard to clean, and knives are commonly used. So we're worried that there's some amushes on the surface. That's one problem with a sakin. Another problem with a sakin, that since there's ducha the sakina, so in a way it approximates the same outcome as cooking would accomplish. in particular when you're doing a dover charif. But we see from this Gemara, Rashi brings down both aspects of the knife. That the reason we see this chumrah is that you have both shum nunis is one reason. Another reason is because the sakina, when you have a dover charif, and there's the deichek of the sakin, the pressure causes the tam to come out. But one thing you see over here is that it's even worse than cooking. According to the halacha, where in general, okay, we have machlek mechaber ramah, not to revisit that, but we certainly have a concept of nat bar nat. But over here, we don't have any exceptions. By dover charif, we don't have any nat bar nat anymore. So in general, at least according to the mechaber, without going into the ramah for a moment, but it's worse than cooking. By cooking, you have a nat bar nat. And over here, with dulka skina, you don't have nat bar nat. So you look at the Rashi over there in Chum. So he says that it gives off the ikar tam. It's not just nat bar nat. It's as if it gave off the thing itself. It doesn't get diluted. Nat bar nat, every time it goes through another stage, it gets somewhat diluted. Tam cholish, like the Ran says, and the Alter Rebbe brings in Ilchos Pesach. So tam cholish, but over here there's no tam cholish. It stays at its previous strength, so it doesn't go down to the level that you should have a nat bar nat. Okay, and this, we see the two big chidushim over here. So it's not totally a chidush. Chidush number one, that the tam can go even though there's no heat. Normally we say something is nice and tam, there has to be some sort of cooking, there has to be some sort of heat. Where over here, we see without any heat, that's point number one. Snain, we're going to have 4 chidushim we see by the din of dover charif. Okay, and they're conveniently numbered on this PowerPoint 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we'll see later on that even though we're going to have a pretty clear psak, both from the Mechaber and from the Ramah, but when you get into the Shach and Taz, and you get to certain cases, we see that since there are machleksin about many of these points, you weigh that if you put together this kula with that kula, sometimes it could be mekel b'diavad. And since there are so many permutations of what could happen with davar charif, it's important to know the background. So chiddush number one, that even though there's no heat, that it's beilei tam. Slain v'selik beilim misakan afilu shein shom davar asayach. There's no heat. And these dvorim charifim, this radish, to keep it simple, the radish is now a fleshika radish. You're not allowed to eat it with milchiks. So that's one chiddush we see from this Gemara. Second chiddush, that it's even worse than nat bar nat. It's the atzma shel tam, like Rashi says. The bliyim masakin alotznein vaselik and nachshev is kanat bar nat. It's even worse than nat bar nat. Because if it would be nat bar nat, the din is it's a previous line, and you don't even have to look for it. It's just the previous line of the Gemara. Clear din. So whatever it is, it was talking about the dogim. It's talking about the same thing with the tznein. And in one case you're allowed, in one case you're not allowed. So it's clear there's no nat bar nat. And Rashi explains that when you look in the Gemara. Fine. So we see over here 2 major chidushim when it comes to the din of dover charif. Any questions? Next. Gemara Neveda Zara Lamtes. So the MS is, it's a Mishnah. The Mishnah, a few dapim earlier, gives the whole list of all the things. You have certain things. It says that these items from Goyim are also ba'ana, and then you have a list of other items that are also b'chila, but they're not also ba'ana. Anything associated with the Veda Zara is also ba'ana. Things which are have other isurim associated with them are prohibited to eat, but they're not also ba'ana. So you have asakum and bishalakum and gvinasakum and all different sorts of cases like this. And on the list, bakeret shel chiltis. Keret is a unit, it's a grain of chiltis. What is chiltis? So nobody knows exactly what chiltis is. One thing about chiltis is that it's extremely, extremely chad. Gemara says that if an animal swallows a keret shel chiltis, that the animal is a treifa, because certainly this chiltis is going to make a hole in its digestive system. And any nikuf is one of the treifas, and any of the internal organs has a hole in it, makes the whole animal a treifa. And chazaka is that the sharpness of this chiltis will make the animal into treifa. So it's a real davar chadif. So you're allowed to buy certain things from goyim. We had a whole machlekes. They wanted to be gezer on shemen, for example, shemen shel goyim, and the gezeda was never really accepted. All discussion. The Gemara is you're allowed to buy oil from a non-Jew. Bread, you're not allowed to buy from a non-Jew. It's pasakum. And the kedesh shel chiltus, you're not allowed to buy from a non-Jew. So what's there should be a problem with a kedesh shel chiltus? A kedesh shel chiltus is a tzemech. It's a vegetable. You can't buy cucumbers from goyim. And what's the problem? My time, I asked the Gemara, what's the reason you can't buy a kedesh shel chiltus? Mishum de mafaska lebesakina. Because they cut it with a knife. Somehow you have to cut this kedesh shel chiltus, and since the knives of the goyim were bolei tam iser, so therefore it's a problem eating this kedesh shel chiltus. And as we learned in the previous Gemara, that since this is davar charif and you're using a knife, and the knife was aser, so then the chiltus is also aser. But the shaila is we have a chazaka. How true this chazaka applies today, especially in a commercial environment, you're dealing with a restaurant, a caterer, something like a hotel. It's very difficult to say that it should apply. But in general, we say stam kelim shel goyim eina b'nei yom. We normally assume that any kelim of a non-Jew or not a ben yom that haven't been used for 24 hours, and therefore the nesen tam lev gam. And we know what the din is. The nesen tam lev gam is b'diavad mutter. If you have a pot and the guy caught chazer in the pot, and the pot is eina ben yemei, and you cooked something kosher in the pot, the b'diavad, it's mutter. Because nesen tam lev gam. It's not barnat. So if you remember, and it's going to be relevant later on, we'll see in the Ramah, that not barnat is only by dvar heter. It has to be not barnat latera. We don't say not barnat if it's a isser. So the fact that the tam chazer went into the pot and went into the water, whatever it is, say that the shtalshus advarim, doesn't help you that it's not barnat. That doesn't work by isser. We don't have not barnat, only latera, not lisur. Yeah, so that's a problem. We don't have any heter for not barnat, unless it's something like Bosor or Chol, something like this. However, Nesen Tam Lev Gam is heter, which makes the whole issue where all the Mefarshim speak about the Rabbi Maitik in this Mukot Sichas, famous Sicha Matas Yud Ches. How should it be that Kli Midyan needed to be kasher? We learn Pashas Matas that it's the Nesen Tam Lev Gam. You leave it 24 hours. It comes out that it must be that they wanted to use the Kalim of Midyan because they were hungry after the Muhammad. That they wanted to use them right away when they were ben Yemen. Questions, how do you do Agola then? Okay, whole issue over there is discussed the Barichas and Sfara. In any case, we assume that Kalim by Agoy are Nesen Tam Lev Gam. So what's the problem? If you use a pot that was Nesen Tam Lev Gam, was Aina ben Yemen, it hasn't been used in the last 24 hours. So B'diavad, the food is, you're not allowed to use L'chatchila, but B'diavad, the food's going to be mutter. So what's the problem? So you bought a kedesh shel chiltus. So the guy used his knife, but the knife is b'pashtus. We assume that it's Eina ben Yemen. So what's the problem? So the Gemara says, Bagavta Omar Mar. But even though we have a principle, Nesen Tam Lev Gam Mutter, it is Nesen Tam Lev Gam, such as more than 24 hours old, then the food is going to be mutter. So the Gemara says, no, Chiltis is different. Agav Chorfe. The chiltisa machle shamnonisa ba'avle b'kanesen tam l'shvach, because of the sharpness of the chiltis. The shumnonisa over here, it comes out from the Rishonim that we're talking about the belia, the tam iser, the tam that was absorbed into the knife of iser. So machalila means that it made it no longer lifgam. And it became Knesen Tam L'Shvach, and that's one of the additional characteristics of a Dover Charif, that it can take Tam, which is Pogum, and turn it into Tam Meshubach. So we see over here that we see from the few words of the Mishnah, Kedesh Shel Chiltis is Aser, so we learn not only another case, Chiltis, where we see that Duchas Tekinas together with Dover Charif creates a Isser. Even further, since we're talking about a sakin, over there we have only the information before us was a benyame, and it wasn't the tampogum. Here we see that even a tampogum, the Gemara says befedish, even a tampogum, and a benyame is also going to be a kamas. Clear? So we get some other principles over here out of this case. So I don't know, maybe that's chiltis on the right of it. I have no idea what it is. I don't think anybody really knows what it is. Looked on a couple of svarim, difficult to identify. So this is chiddush number 3. The chiltis mashpicha tampogum hablua bekli. That we see from this case that chiltis at least will take up tampogum, make him tam shubach. And we have something else also over here that comes out that the whole chiltis is also. Now, this is somewhat controversial, and we're soon going to discuss it. The Ikar Adin. Okay, let's first get to the main issue over here. We see over here 2 chumras that we didn't really see clearly. How far was mispashet debatable? What we learned from the previous Gemara, but one thing we see over here is a very, very big chumrah, which is very, very important in real life. That even though it's ein ben yemei, that it's still prohibited. Very big chumrah. The shaila is maybe it's only chiltis. Maybe chiltis is a special case. Maybe chiltis is even sharper than snai and silka. So just because we have a Gemara that says that chiltis, who says that that's true with every last case? And in fact, what exactly defines a davar charif anyway? We're going to see throughout. We have over here chiltis, we know is the davar charif, and we know about snain, and we know about silka. But that's all we really know from the Gemara. What's with onions? What's with garlic? What's with lemons? What's with salted fish? So we're going to have a whole discussion about different levels of davar charif. But there certainly are rishonim that hold that this chumrah of neisen tam livgam becoming a tam shubach through davar charif does not apply la halacha because it only applies to chiltis. L'maisa, we paskin that even an onion, that if you cut an onion with an ein ben yemei knife, then it's the same thing as if we'll cut with a ben yemei. Doesn't make any difference. So we're machmer l'maisa. But again, sometimes it could be used as a sniff. But to understand where that came from, you have to see the Gemara to know that it says befedish in your Gemara that neisen tam lefgam is also with davar charif. Yeah, but it's only talking about chiltis. Who says it applies to the other cases? Maybe it's only applies to chiltis. So in the chat, the Gemara talking about chiltis, why do we apply it to much less spicy foods? Yeah, that was the question. Okay, this was you could post this on the group also. It's a good question. The question was the chiltis is so much more sharper. Why should we think it applies to other foods? Those rishonim hold that chiltis is more sharp than the other ones. But for according to the other rishonim, there's no difference. They're all sharp foods and they're all in the same category. The one that differentiates and wants to say that that it doesn't apply, it's really to the Maram Rothenberg. The famous Maram Rothenberg, we spoke about him so many times. So many famous Talmidim, the Rosh, the Mordechai, Sharadura, Kos Maimonides. Okay, so the Maram Rothenberg, and even he didn't really want to be Mekel. He held Beker Adin, the way he understood the Gemara is that he was sort of Neta, that it only applies to chiltis, but to be Mekel Lamaisa, he wasn't ready to be made a hira and be materit. It's a svara, but we don't have such expertise to know exactly what's going on up here. So what we have so far is we have 4 chumras in Lagabe davar charif. So now let's go a little further. Okay, so here we have our first 2 chumras, and let's discuss them a little bit. So we know about Snaim Vaselek. This is from the first Gemara, Gemara Chum. We know that even though it's called their Beleya, because ducha deskina. And we know that it's called ikar shel tam, and it's not, I know it sounds funny, it's not barnat. Doesn't have the din of not barnat. Fine. Madim shel shal dvarim charifim b'din mele. We have many other dvarim charifim in the world. So here are two most famous ones in the kitchen, especially the one on the right. An onion is, we normally treat as a davar charif. And shum is a davar charif. It's quoted by the poskim, or in Shulchan Aruch. And what is the status? And what is the din of of these various things? Okay. So here you have a Rabbeinu Yechiel. Rabbeinu Yechiel is quoted in Tur, and he holds that no, the Gemara said Snain, and the type of Yarek which is Selek, and that's the only things that are considered Dvarim Charifim. But the other is Shein, and therefore you wouldn't have to worry about the onions. You don't have to worry about the onions. You don't have to worry about the garlic. You just have to worry about Chiltis and Sunayin and Silka. Everything else you don't have to worry about. The other Rishonim don't agree. The Gemara, the Shaila is, are Sunayin, was Sunayin just an example of a Dover Charif? I mean, the Gemara, not an encyclopedia, doesn't have to bring down every single case. So was it specifically those things which are listed, or does it include all things that are in the same category? So most of the Rishonim learn, and we talk a paskan like that, that other Dvarim Charifim have the same din as Sunayin. So radishes and onions are in the same halacha category. But don't forget, there is an opinion that disagrees. And sometimes when you have something which really looks like maybe it's mutter anyway, it's sort of stretching this isser, how far does it go? So then you might say, okay, remember Rabbeinu Yechiel, it's only an onion. Rabbeinu Yechiel allowed onions. So maybe it's not such a problem. Okay, we don't paskin, again, we don't paskin like that. But sometimes it's important to know that because you might need it for another occasion, so to speak. Okay. And so the Shulchan Aruch and the Poskim, they all paskin like the other Rishonim. But again, it's not to say that there's not another opinion. There is beferish another opinion. Now, we have bigger machlekes about over here, about tampon. And this is a major chumrah, as we understand from real life. You know, you have some milchik knife. When was the last time this knife was used for milchik? Somebody cut an onion with a milchik knife. So what do they use the milchik knife for? They used it for cream cheese, and they used it to cut up a cold cheese sandwich. What do they use it for? They use it for hot cheese. How often use a hot cheese? You don't cut the macaroni and cheese with a knife normally. Okay, they cut a piece of pizza. The pizza was hot. I was the klisheni, so say it over gush. Okay, so it's milchik. Absorbed milchik, fine. When's the last time you cut the hot pizza with this knife? How long ago? I don't know how long ago. Okay, it could be a year ago. Okay, so it's ain't ben yem. Normally you wouldn't worry about it, but now we have it over charif, so it's a major chumrah. Okay, and in this we have a machlekes about this third point. Okay, so we know about chiltis. But what about other dvarim charif? What's with the onion and the garlic? What ain't ben yem? For that matter, what's with the snain and the silka? What ain't ben yem? What's the so that you have machlekes? I mentioned before, the Maram in Brandenburg says nigamor chiltis. Rak chiltis mashpich tampog machmas charifus harav. That's the Maram Brandenburg learns pshat that the reason. And just to give hezbollah, the Mishnah in Aveda Zorah is listing the things you're not allowed to buy from Goyim. Why didn't they ask its name? If it applies to all Dvarim Charifim, why should they only ask Chiltis? Now, that might be a simple answer. As someone that never in his life bought Chiltis, even from a Yid, much less from a Goy, I don't really understand what's the problem with Chiltis. Maybe if I took a look at it, I would understand why it's more of a problem. The sakin of the Goy, but a Chilt is more than the Tznein. I mean, the Tznein, but Pashtus, you take a radish and you pull it out of the ground. So you don't really need to cut it with a knife in order to sell it. And if a Chiltis, you do. I don't know. But that's the way the Maram Rottenberg the Iker understood that the reason the Chachamim Gezer on the Chiltis, Kedet Shel Chiltis, is because there was more sharpness than other vegetables. But Sefer HaTruma from the early Bali Atesvis and many other Rishonim hold no, it's just another example. They were gazer on Kerishal Chiltis, but the same thing would apply to other Dvarim Harifim, Gamshad Dvarim Harifim, Mashpichim Tampogum, that they also will be able to take up Tampogum and make it in Tamashul. So, what's the din? So the emes is, when you look in Shulchan Aruch, it says there in Mashma Shulchan Aruch Kedei. So this is a little bit tricky. We'll soon see Shulchan Aruch inside. But let's just give some klolim. Way back in the first year, we talked about some klolim. So let's say we had in Sim Peizayin, when we had the Rosh about Meicholav, Meicholav. I'm helping you out with Yechazorah, by the way. So you have a Yesh Mi, that you have someone that gives the following din. Now, when the Machaber brings such a din in a sif on its own, so the Sifrei Klolei Apaskim write that even though he only brings it as a Das Yochid, but he means to paskin like that. Why does it write only Yesh Misha Emer, Yesh Misha Eser, Yesh Misha Mata, whatever the case is? Because he only found one of the Rishonim that wrote it beferish. So he paskins like that, but since he's bringing it on its own, so even though it's only brought down as a Das Yochid, nevertheless, he means to paskin like that. However, if he brings in the same sifa Yesh Emri, or Yesh Misha Emer, or Yesh Misha Eis, or whatever the case is, he brings it. So he brings, you have some case, Yesh Emrim this, or Yesh Emrim that. So then they're both shokol. I mean, you have to write one before the other, right? But if the first one he writes stam, Mechaber writes a din, and then at the end he says Yesh Emrim, and some say differently. So in general, we're saying Klal HaPoskim that means that he really wants to paskin like the stam. Okay. So over here, the Mechaber paskin Amaram Rottenberg. Okay. But then brings the Das Sefer Truma immediately afterwards as a Das Yochid, even though there are others. Yeshemrim. And the Ramah paskins like that. So the Shaila, is this really a machlek, the Mechaber Ramah? So there are other Klali HaPoskim and the Achreinim in general that they ask a pashta question. If the Mechaber means to paskin like the first day, and he doesn't want to paskin like the second day, why is he quoting the Bechal Shulchan Aruch? If he means that you shouldn't go like that day, he's not showing his bekiyas to show that he knows that there's another day. Go look in the Beis Yosef. You're anyway supposed to look in Beis Yosef before you learn Shulchan Aruch. So other Klal HaPoskim learn that the reason the Mechaber brings down the Yesh Misha Eser or the Yesh Emer, if you have a stricter opinion, is that it's kedai to be machmer like them. That the proper hanhaga is to be strict like this second opinion. So even though Be'ikar Adin, it's like the one that's quoted by Stam, and that's why over here it says Mashmois or Shulchan Aruch, that many learn that that's really the main psak of the Mechaber is like the Maram Rottenberg. But since he does quote in Shulchan Aruch the day of the Sefer Truma, so therefore there's not such a strong machlek. Many places we have machlek, Mechaber Ramah. You see it clear by not for not. Many other places we have machlek Mechaber Ramah, but over here it's not so cut and dry that there's definitely a machlekes. Take a look at the chat over here a second. You know what? I'll get to the end of the sip maybe, and I'll go through the chat. Okay, we have over here the question of how far does it aser? Okay, so that we see this onion was now cut in half. We saw it was a red knife, right? It's fleshka knife. Cut this onion in half. The knife was a fleshka eine ben yeme. No, so what's the din? According to Maram Rottenberg, mutter, it's not chiltis. It's not a problem. According to Sefer Truma and the Ramah passages like that, then it's a problem. It's a problem. You know, in Ben Yemei, it's still prohibited. Okay. So here we have the Mashmoisa Shulchan Aruch that it's mutter. Why? Because Tama Bosor Shabbasakan Pogam Veina Hefech has a Bosor Lebsori. That it doesn't have the power, only Chiltis has the power to do that. Because the Mashmoisa Shulchan Aruch, the Pasuk Merotenberg. But the Ramah says, no, this onion, Asr mutter doesn't mean whether you're allowed to eat it or not. You see the question on the top, can you use this onion and eat it with milchik? So Ramah says, no. So that's putting together the second chumrah we had, that like we quoted from Rashi, that it's pulling out not just nes and tam, it's the ikra tam, and we learn out from chiltis to other dvarim charifim that has the power to take a tam pogo and make it a tam reshut. Okay, so that's the way it comes down to halacha. The shayla then becomes how much of it exactly is asur, and that comes to point number 4. Point number 4, we see that the entire chiltis becomes asur. So it's mashma that the tam is mispashet b'chol chiltis. However, it's not simple at all whether that's the case, and this is a big machlekes rishonim too. So if you cut this onion with a fleshik knife, does the entire onion become fleshik, or only part of the onion become fleshik? Let's just review a second. Let's say you cut a potato with a fleshik knife, a clean fleshik knife, for argument's sake. What's with the potato? What do you do with it? No, Rabbi said
it's mutter for even for milk.
Yeah, you have to do anything to it. But Pashas, you have to do adacha, because we're worried there's a little bit of a remnant, something on the knife. Okay, so you do adacha, finish do adacha. You don't have to grate it, you don't have to do, so no, not klippa, not natila, don't ask the whole thing. Okay, what's the problem? The problem over here dealing with the davar charif. So the question is, how far is this tam mispashet? So here you have a Rashba, and the Rashba holds that not only by chiltis and mispashet, but all the dvarim charif mispashet through the entire object, the entire vegetable that was cut. Other Rishonim said no, that taka by chiltis it's like that, but shad dvarim charif tam mispashet brak kadei netila. So hadach is not enough, and grade is not enough, and even cliff is not enough. But you'd need kadei netila. Kadei netila is ka'eva etzba, so it's the width of a thumb. According to Chaim No, that's 2 centimeters. For those that don't deal in metric, an inch is 2.54 centimeters. So it's a little smaller than an inch wide, and that's kadei netila. So what's going to happen is you're going to have to take kadei netila from each side. Now, how do we paskin over here? So the Ramah paskin lechatchila, you should be chesher l'das Rashba, and therefore we have to consider the possibility that the tam was mispasha bakula. And again, that's l'chumer, not l'kula. We had this earlier also, the exact same scenario. So we say, oh, now it can be mashaya bakula. So maybe it'll become batul b'shishim. So we say, no, but l'chumer, we're concerned that it went further. That's not to say that it definitely went further to the extent that we can be mavatla. Okay, so we're cheshesh that it went through the entire thing. The other Rishonim say no, it's good enough to cut off kadei netila, and that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. L'chatchila, the Ramah says b'diavad, we can rely on that. So beikar adin, l'chatchila should be machmal like the Rashba. Beikar adin, we hold the netila is sufficient, and we're going to end up using that in many cases. But although we don't normally, it's heipach halacha, heipach hashkafa, to run your life according to b'diavad, but certain circumstances make what is in one case, a b'diavad makes the lechatchila. We're going to have some cases like that later on. We're going to rely on this whole idea of kedei natila. So what does this end up looking at? See, here we have the same onion being cut with the same fleshika knife. So now what are you going to have to do? So so the answer to that is no. No, we pass and it's not just the things that the Gemara is talking about, it's all the Dvarim Charitim. So according to Shulchan Aruch, Yesh Lachad, L'Haser Kedei Natila Mikol Tzad Shel Asakim. Bashar Mutarim Chalav. That's what you do. You take 2 centimeters. Now you have to take from both sides. You have to take 2 centimeters from one side, 2 centimeters from the other side. You don't have too much onion left after that. If you have an onion that's smaller than 4 centimeters, it's a pretty small onion. But here we brought some show and tell over here. So I have a cucumber. So this cucumber is 5 centimeters long. Okay, so if this was cut down the middle, this cucumber, and I would take an etzba on the one side, an etzba on the other side. So you see over here, there's not too much left of this cucumber. Okay, a cucumber is not a dover charif, but if it would be a dover charif, let's say it would be a radish or something like that, so then there'd be no anyway. According to Ramah, anyway, we asked for the entire onion. We consider that the tam bosor, which was in the sakin, the masad dug the skin, went through the entire machmer l'chatchila like the rashba, and concerned that it went through all the way to the end of the onion. Okay, so here there's a milchika soup which is cooking. So now here the onion fell in the soup. The person didn't realize that it was a milchika knife. They cut a fleshika knife. They cut the onion in half with a fleshika knife and making a vegetable soup. And they threw it into milchika vegetable soup. They're making cheese soup and throw it into the milchika pot. So what do we have now? We have a problem. We have a problem because this is now a fleshka onion. However, that's only lechatchila. If we want to see if there's shishim, do you need to be mevatel the entire onion b'shishim or not? So b'di'ever, everybody holds it's enough shishim connected the kedei natila, because the Ramah is mater. He only says we should be machmer like the Rashba l'chatchila to answer the whole onion. I mean, again, I have to be careful with my lashon because it's very important halacha we're speaking. We don't answer the onion. It's a fleshka onion, but it's a kosher fleshka onion. As long as the knife was a kosher knife, so it's a kosher fleshka sakin. So it's not a problem. So it's a kosher onion. The problem is it's a fleshka onion. I wouldn't take this too far, but just in Higoyin, it's helpful that once a davar charif is cut with a fleshika knife, so the part that became asur is like a piece of meat. You don't have to wait 6 hours afterwards. Okay, maybe we'll have some other cases that might be different. But when you start measuring whether you have bittul or not, people don't get this straight, so they made themselves a cheese omelet by mistake. They cut up the onion with a fleshika knife and they put it in. So okay, well, they heard something. Mamaisa with a knife, with an onion, could be a problem. This and that. Is it? What would you think if you had little pieces of hamburger floating around in your cheese omelet? This is a fleshik, and when you're cutting into small pieces, and the size from one piece to another piece is less than kedei natilas, then obviously the whole thing is going to be fleshik. So here you dice an onion. So when you take an onion, you cut it in half. So shaykh, you can take the kedei natila. Again, the Ramah lechatchila says, and we pass them like the Ramah. So lechatchila, you have to treat the whole onion as being fleshik. Okay, but the Yevid, once it was used already, so then we can be mashayir against the kedei natila. But here, somebody chopped up an onion. So the distance from the onion, from the knife to the end of the onion, is always here less than kedei natila. So therefore, you're going to have to treat the whole onion as fleshik, even b'di'evet. So the entire onion, and that's going to be even b'di'evet, even according to the Ramah. So you're going to put this in over here. So even b'di'evet, it's not going to be enough to be mashayir b'kedei natila, because Kedei Natila included every single piece of onion that was cut. Okay, so this is something which needs some review, a little bit of review, how it applies to our case. And that's the din we had in Sadik base, the din of Chatich and Nasa Nevela. So if you remember, we had a Machlekes, the Rabbeinu Ephraim, and do we say Chatich and Nasa Nevela only by Bosor B'chola, or do we say Chatich and Nasa Nevela also by Shari Sur? So the Machaber held that Paskin that Chatich and Nasa Nevela is only Bosor B'chola and not B'Shari Surim. And the Ramah, with a few exceptions, in general, we Paskin Chatich and Nasa Nevela is not only Bosor B'chola, also with Shari Surim. Okay, that was Machlekes we had over here. So now, it's probably worthwhile getting clear over here. It'll help us understand things later on as well, and I think it'll bring some fair light on the case we're discussing right over here. If this would be a treifa knife, what would be with the onion? The onion would be treif. Fine. So davar charif, and that's the din of the Mishnah. Kedish Chiltis says the Bar Mishnah not allowed to eat Kedish Chiltis because they're using a treifa knife to cut. Fine. So now the davar charif is now treif. Now, how much of it is considered to be treif? Okay, and what's the aspect of that? Let's make it even better. So here, again, I brought some, just worked out conveniently over here today. We have some props here. Always, so the only problem is the artificial background makes it difficult to see. So I have to hold it in front of my face, otherwise it blends into the Havineni background. Okay, so here we have a relatively small knife, and here we have a relatively, oh no, I disappeared. Oh, it's mamish dangerous, this knife. Yes, now we have a big knife. There's a big knife. Yeah, big knife. So let's say imagine this was the davar charif, and you're cutting it with this knife. Yeah. So obviously the knife is bigger than the thing you're cutting. Let's say it would be this, and you're cutting it with this knife. Now, the knives are very, very thin. And especially it would be a smaller knife like that fleishika knife that you had cutting the onion. It's very possible that you have shishim against the blade of the knife. The knife is very small. Now, how do you know what's shishim? So imagine just the blade now. Take the blade, 60 times the volume of this blade. How would you figure that out? So you do displacement. It's not so easy to measure unless you have a precise instrument. But you take a keli full of water and you stick the blade inside and you see how much it goes up. It doesn't go very up. It go up very far. This knife does not have a lot of volume, and kolshken, if it's a smaller knife and it's a thinner knife, that they don't have that much volume, and very often you end up having bittul b'shishim. So, how much fleish katam can go into one onion? Okay, if you took this one knife, for example, and you cut 50 onions. So how much tam bosor is there? Just to pick a number, let's say volume, we'll use milliliters as volume, because we're going to measure over here by volume. So let's say, for argument's sake, the knife, okay, we'll don't take real numbers, just take numbers that are easy to work out. We'll say that the knife was 10 milliliters of volume. Okay, so you have bittul b'shishim. How much is bittul b'shishim going to be? 60 times 10, which is 600. So you need 600 milliliters. 1,000 milliliters is a liter. Okay, so it's less than a liter of volume. So let's say a person cut up 1,000 milliliters of onions. Okay, so what's going to be now? Do we have 1,000 milliliters? Since we have 1,000 milliliters of diced onions, do we have 1,000 milliliters of fleshik, or do we have 600 milliliters of fleshik? What do we have here? So if it would be iser, and we pass on like the Ramah, that chtichnas and avela, So therefore, when you cut the onions with a treifa knife, and then we say that the onions were not in the vela, the onions became usher. So now we have 1,000 milliliters of isser. But now we're not talking about isser, we're talking about heter. We're talking about bosor. So therefore, since it's heter, there's no nasan avela. Nasan avela is when there's bosor meeting chalav. But here we just have tam bosor meeting onions. There's no isser over here at all. There's going to be isser if you put it in with the milchiks, it'll become musser. Ben Ephraim is not worried about that. This is kula heter. So how much bosor do you have? You cannot have more than 600 milliliters. Excuse me. You can't have more than 10 milliliters of tam basar. All you could possibly have is 10 milliliters of basar. Okay, so even though all these onions, you're going to have to consider fleshik. You don't know what was cut first. You don't know what's cut second. You don't know how much is in each one. But if you take the whole bunch and you throw it into a milchik soup, you're going to have to be mavatal only the tam basar. You only have to be mashayir against the sakin. And I'll tell you even more. If a person was careful and they said they're only using the top part of the sakin, they're not going to use the bottom part of the sakin. Then you only have to be mashayir against this because the bottom part also the tam didn't go into it. And we had this before also a number of cases. So if you didn't pay attention, you say later on, I think I'll use this here. So that's no good. The person wasn't consciously aware of what he's doing, so we don't assume that he was medayik and the person could just make a chalemis. Doesn't really know what happened. Okay. So let's say we're going to be mashayir against the whole blade. Okay, but more than that, you don't have any more basar than that. So if you use the same knife and you cut many dvarim charifim, so finished. You don't have to be mavatal all of those onions. All you have to be mavatal is the sakin. And that's because it's heter. If it would be iser, then taka we have in your chetich and nas and avela. Since we're dealing over here with heter, you don't have to be mavatal all the onions. You have to be mavatal the sakin. Because more than the tam basar, which was in the knife, more than that, you can't have. It doesn't keep multiplying. When you have chtichnas and avela, like it would be if it was a treifa knife, so then each piece of onion becomes asar on its own merit or demerit, whatever you want to call it. It now was nas and avela. So you started off with 10 milliliters of isser, and now you cut 50 milliliter onion. Now you got 50 milliliters of isser. And you cut another onion, you got another 50 milliliters. You got another 50 milliliters. But with heter, that doesn't happen. There's no chatich hanas nevel if it's heter. So therefore, you cannot possibly have more than 10 milliliters of tam basar. So that's what it says over here. So if you had over here the sakin, so that's the case if it was a case of heter. But a botzel kotzes neser also lachol. That's the case. I don't know if you can see my thing is blocked over here. That says on the top, kitzus a basar dak basakin iser. Okay, so if it was a treifa knife, so then the onions all become aser. Okay, and then you have to measure against all the botzel, not against not betafshil. So the Shulchan Aruch, you remember the machlekes mechaber amas. So the mechaber holds there's no chatich hanas available b'shari surim. So he doesn't care as far as this din is concerned. It doesn't make a difference whether it's a kosher knife, which is fleshik, or a treifa knife. Why? Because the mechaber does not hold that there's nasin avei b'shari surim. So therefore, you need shishim keneged that is or below basakin. As far as the mechaber is concerned, he doesn't have nachatich nasin avei b'shari surim. So for him, it doesn't have the power. This treifa knife does not have the power to make more isur than it has within itself. But according to the Rama, who holds as yechtich nasavel b'shari surim, you need shishim keneged kol abatzal kol zekenas chitich nasan avel. It's chanan b'shari surim according to the Rama. Therefore, you need to be mevatel everything. Questions?
I have a question on the 2 slides ago. It said, yeah, the one before this. I'm sorry, after this. Is this one.
This one?
Yeah. In the next part, yeah, right over here.
Yeah. Question?
I think it was the next. If you click one more time, it said that according to the Ramah, no, this wasn't it. You have to remove the
Because
No, my question was about where the Mechaber writes about that if you cut it, you only need the tila, and it gets cooked with milchiks, then you need shishim against kedei natila.
We're going to learn Mechaber soon inside. That's the we're almost there. Next slide.
You said on the slide you need shishim. You need shishim against kedei natila though. Why? I thought it's.
Let's learn both. We'll discuss when we get to the Mechaber. We're still going to see the Mechaber inside. Okay. So if you could just hang on to that question, we'll see if we answer it in the next piece of it. We'll learn the Mechaber inside. This was all introduction to be able to understand the Mechaber Ramah. Not to mention the Shach and Taz. Okay, so let's go for them.
So are we splitting the understanding of the Gemara as far as a chiltis, if it applies? So as far as as far as Ben Yemei, we say it applies to all all spicy foods, but when it comes to how far the taste goes, there we don't apply it completely like the chiltis, and we say that it's b'diavad. It's different than a chiltis, and because
let's see. We'll see it now. Mechaber Ramah. Now we'll be able to understand the Mechaber Ramah. Once you see the background, so you see it's 2 separate issues. It's you said exactly the issue. We have one issue is the Gaba chiltis. Again, we had 2 chumras we saw by chiltis. One chumra by chiltis is that it was meshabech hatam pogum, and the other chumra by chiltis is the asa bakula. So do we take both? Do we extrapolate from those 2 chumras to other dvarim charifim too? So each one we have a machlekes about it. So let's now learn Shulchan Aruch inside. We'll see how we pass it. So this is Siman Tzadik Vav Sif Aleph. Sneina Silka. Just by the way, I don't know if you guys feel it, but those of you that learned this before, or Bachal, you learn Shulchan Aruch, you open Shulchan Aruch, and Sneina Silka. Okay, very nice. Why did you choose Sneina Silka? Here you see that we don't see chiltis here. We're talking about shar dvarim charifim. So the cases that as they've been quoted, you already understand before you even get very far in learning the din how it is the Mechaber's paskin. You know what it's talking about already. You have all the backgrounds. It makes it much much more geschmack, much clearer to learn and to understand. So tsnein oisilkam, which are sharp food, shachatcham basakim shal Bosor ben Yemei. Okay, because we're only talking about a ben Yemei. As you see, the Mechaber is passing like Maram Rottenberg, and he holds that the din of a ben Yemei is only by chiltis, and that's why he's only bringing a case of Tzneina Silka, and he's not bringing the case of chiltis. Okay, so you have a Tzneina Silka is only be a problem according to the Mechaber's first daya, which is the Pashtus Mashmois of Mechaber, is only if it's a ben Yemei, or Yishein Makonach, or the knife wasn't clean. So then there was Shamnunis. Okay, so in both of those cases, we have to worry about a blia that, as a result of the duch of the sakina, that there's going to be taste absorbed into the tznein. Why? Because if it's a ben yemei for shteitzach, that it's going to be absorbed. Okay, and not ikr shel tam. Yeah, that's what we learned out in the case of tznein from the Gemara Chulin. Okay, if it's not mekonach, then even if it's an ein ben yemei. That's what he says. So if it's a ben yemei or not a ben yemei, but it's dirty, sheina makunach. So then you have the shemnunis, which is on the outside of the knife, which we're worried that it's going to be nivla into the tznein. So in either of these 2 cases, also lachlan b'challah. You're not allowed to eat the radish or the silka with milk. Yitel means kadei netila. You have to take kadei netila. Mimakam achtach. Kadei netila is makam. You have to take away kadei netila. Shuka avi atzba. That's the width of a finger. We'll come back to this next phrase. We'll come back to this later. But then we have the other Rishonim that disagree. The Huadin Leina Ben Yemei. That the same thing applies. The Chumrah of Eina Ben Yemei that we saw by Chiltis. So even if it's Eina Ben Yemei, V'hu Makunach. So we don't have any other reason to treat this snain, this radish, as being fleshik, other than the time of Eina Ben Yemei. So the Yesh Eimrim holds, not the Gemara but the Chiltis is an example. And the same thing applies to other Dvarim Charifim. And if you did not take kadei netila, but you didn't taste it either to see it was no tam basar. That's part of the phrase we just skipped that we're going to come back to. Okay, and you cooked it with milk. You need shishim against the place where the knife touched it. Because Mechaber does not differentiate between Isser and Heter in this case, because he does not hold, as we said before, he does not hold Chanan by Shari Surim. So therefore, you're only going to have to measure against the place, the part of the knife where you touched, and you're going to measure Kadei Netila. And the Rama adds, and this is all a continuation of this, then Mechaber, there's a discussion achreinim whether he's referring to all the cases or what exactly he's referring to the Rama. But Pashas, this is just a continuation of the din we just had. So you have to measure against the entire tznein, because the measure against the natil is not going to work, like we said before. That you have more than kadei natila. The shaila is, why don't you measure Keneged Sakin? So Bapashtis, it's because the sakin was bigger than the thing you were cutting in such a case. I mean, there's discussion achreinim, why it is he's not mentioning that you measure against the sakin, but that's the simple answer to that question.
It's not because of Chatichanas and Avela?
No, that's the next part. Yeshemrim, because like I said, this is a continuation along to Shita and the Mechaber. Okay, he's not. If the Ramah is disagreeing with the Mechaber, he's got to say so, and he's going to say so right now. But before the Yesh Eimrim, he's going according to Shita and Mechaber. There's no Chanam B'Shari Surah. Now comes the issue of Chanam. Yesh Eimrim.
How did you?
Let's just finish the Ramah. And this is going back over there to Tzadik base, and that's the same Yeshemrim, based on the Chumrah the Ramah that we say Chanan B'Shari Surim. So therefore, this whole din that we're talking about over here is only when we're talking about Heter. Then we can talk about the Kadei Netila, being Mavadl Kadei Netila, measuring against the second, all of these things, taking Kaiva Etzba. Go out the window if you have Chanan B'Shari Surim. So that's the Yeshem of the Ramah. So Yim Chata B'Sakin Shal Yisr, Kula Yasser. Became a Chata B'Sakin Shal Bosor. And now comes the Rashba. So too, we have a Chumrah that if you cut it with a fleshika knife, also Kula B'Cholev. Remember? Because the Rashba said it goes more than Ka'eva Etzba. So up until now, we're going according to the other Rishonim that say that how far is in the mispashet? Only by Chiltis, it's mispashet through the whole thing. The Rashba comes along and says, no, you have to measure even if it's heter. You have to measure against the whole onion. Okay, so the din is lechatchila the same. If it's this, you got to measure against the whole thing. So it's fakert from the Mechaber. According to the Mechaber, by both of them you have to measure Kadei Netila, and according to the Ramah, you have to measure them both against the entire Tznein, but for totally different reasons. By the Sakin Shalissid, you have to measure against the whole thing because he holds by this Chanan B'Shari Surim. By Heter, it was the Sakin Shal Bosor, he answers it because of Dasar Ashba. And since that's the case, Kain Negan Lechatchila, it's only a Chumra Lechatchila. Lechatchila, you should measure against the whole thing. But the Yevid, it was already cooked, ain't less a Rakadenatil. He agrees with me, he's going to be Machmer like the Rashba to measure against the whole thing. Only Lechatchila, but the Yevid, it was already cooked over there. You only have to be Mabatul Kadenatila. Questions?
How did you teach the words in the end of the Mechaber? Tzarech Shishim Kneged Mashem Noga Me'asakin Bahem. That's Kedei Natila, or that's Kneged Asakin?
Yeshem the word in the on and between you Magnum not Mahem Kaden Sils Mam Galantam Basham Tzarech the Shishim Kneged Mashem Noga Basakin. So you measure the Kedei Natila, okay, from the place where it was cut. Let's say, for example, I have this will be its name. Okay, I don't have the camera on, so I need to expand my horizons over here. Yeah, over here. So now we have the part, and I cut it over here. Here, just cut a piece of cucumber. Okay, so now this part is already, this little piece over here is Kedei Natila, is like the whole thing's less than Kedei Natila. Again, now how much do I have to measure? I have to measure only part that the Sakin touched. I have to take Kedei Natila only of this, let's see, only of this part. I don't have to take it against the whole surface. Wherever it touched, I have to take Kedei Natila. Wherever the knife touched, you take Kedei Natila. That's Bosor. Okay, let me see what's going on in the chat. Okay. Oh, we got a few comments over here. You want to talk about chiltis? Yeah, we talked about that. Lamais, we always apply the chum of chiltis even to less spicy foods. Okay, so that's the machlekes we have between the first day and the yeshemrim and the Ramah's Mahmer. We'll soon see in the next sif. Doesn't Ramah pass like the Rashba? Yes, the Chatchila. These were private messages. Where does the Ramah mention whether there are Charim Shabech Tam Pogum? So yes, we're gonna have that soon. Yeah, it's going to say clear later on. Okay, are we splitting the understanding of filter spices of the starter foods that are burning benyam? They're similar, but spread b'diavad, they're different. Yeah, that's what we just had in the Ramah. So it's different. Whether you the psakim, the machlekes of how to learn chiltis, it's two separate, unrelated machlekes. Whether it's regarding tampogum and whether it's special bakule, it's not really shitose. Each one has its own chumrah and its own kula, and they're not necessarily related to each other.
As regards,
we have another day. Just want to mention over here. The Rebbe brings down a Minchas Yankiv. In Minchas Yankiv, we mentioned him a few times. He's the same as Baal Shvus Yankiv, Chayk Yankiv, brought many svarim. That when the Ramah says L'chatchila b'diavad, what does it mean b'diavad? So the Shita Minchas Yankiv is b'diavad means after you cut it. L'chatchila means cutting it almanas to do something with it. Once you cut it already, it's called b'diavad. But most of the poskim seem that they don't hold like this. The b'diavad means it's already mixed in with the milchids. So then at that point, we'll be Meshayr against the Kedei Natila. Good. Any other questions on this before we have a missing piece of Mechaber that we sort of skipped?
if just B'chalal, how do we take the one Gemara and have a one and decide that it could applies to other sharp foods on one hand, but it doesn't apply to other sharps on the other hand. How does that? Seems
the Rishonim are learning the Gemara different.
Either the Gemara is talking about when it says chiltas, it means it's referring to all foods, and that would apply in both cases, or it's not. No.
You have to go into the Rishonim. There's a whole discussion with it. The Rishonim Achreinim about it. I mean, it's not. It's not necessarily because I tell you, I don't know what a Kedesh al Chiltis looks like. To me, if a behemoth is swallowing a Kedesh al Chiltis, then the thing is that it's Neser Kule because it's less than Kedei Netil. It's like you cut something dak. Okay, so whether that's B'chal even a factor over here, whether you can extrapolate for that or not, so there are Rishonim that don't agree with the Rashba. But that could be not because it has to do with the definition of Chiltis as Dover Charif, and it could be do questions with the size of a Chiltis. Anyway, it's all discussion over there in the whole discussion in the Gemara. I want to come back to this din over here that we have. My screen doesn't show up. Do you see something highlighted now on your screen? Anything highlighted here? Oh, now it's highlighted. Okay, I see. I skipped this line over here before. So the Mechaber said that once you cut this radish with a fleshka knife, the only way you're going to be able to eat it with chalav is you have to take a denatil. But the Mechaber gives you another eitzah here. Taste it, and as long as there's no tam basar, so then rinse it off to make sure there's nothing on the surface, and there's no problem because it doesn't have tam basar. Now, if you remember, we discussed a couple of times, even though it's in the beginning of Elchas Taruv, but we discussed that when it comes to being Mashar B'Shishim, that really what's the whole gather of Shishim is nice and tam. And the Mechaber held that you can give it to a guy to taste. So you have where Isser fell into a heter, that's what it's talking about the beginning of Taruvas, so some chaylev fell into the food. Give it to a guy and you see if he tastes this tam chaylev. So then you have all discussion right at the beginning of Taruvas, he has to be Mesech Ufituma, can you rely him and not rely him? In any case, the Ramaz forget about this whole thing with a guy. Yeah, we know the Gemara says it, but practically speaking, you can't do it. You have to be Mashayim B'Shishim. Always Mashayim B'Shishim. And we mentioned it earlier a few times that the same issue came up. Then the Mechaber was saying B'Neis and Tam, and going to come to Ramah and says B'Shishim. That's all the Shitasi. It's the same machlekes which is going away all around. So we don't rely on the teima, the tasting. This is called in the Gemara Kfeila Arma, an Aramean chef. So whether it has to be a chef or it could be stama nachri, that's the whole discussion over there in Hilchos Taros. But we don't rely. The Ramah doesn't rely on tasting. Now over here, the Ramah doesn't really say anything. Normally, we'd expect the Ramah pop in over here and say, "No, we don't hold by tasting. You need shishim." Okay, so why do we not need that? That was the first day the shishim against the kedei netila. But over here, Mechaber says that as long as you taste it, you don't taste any basar. So then it's fine, and the Ramah doesn't seem to be bothered. So the Nesa Kalim bring out that the difference is over there talking about a guy, and here we're talking about a yid. So over there, since you worried some chayla fell in, or it's Bosor b'chol, if you can't give it a yid to taste, what's going to be? The yid's going to taste it, and he says, okay. Taka has chaylev in it. Now it's asur. He made a yid eat chaylev. Not allowed to do that. He's not allowed to taste it if it's a suffix. It's vekad deraisa. Tam ke'eker we hold big, and it's all machlekes, but we hold it. It's vekad mideraisa. We learn the Hilchos Taros. Again, sadek ches. But if it's heter, there's no problem having a yid taste it. So you have different cases. You have truma. So truma. If it's min b'minei, so then it's one shir. But if it's min she'ena mina, then we also have b'neis and tam. So you can give it a kain to taste. You have a person made a neder not to eat a certain food. He made a neder not to drink apple juice. So you give it to somebody who didn't make such a neder, and you see if there's any time apple juice in it. For somebody else it's mutter. So normally we rely on tam. But over here, the mechaber, since it's just a shaila, whether this radish is fleshik or not, taste the radish and see if there's tam in it. But the Nesa Kalim are not happy with this for obvious reasons. I mean, any of you guys ever tasted a fleshka onion just because it was covered with a fleshka knife? So the Taz brings down the Teres Chatas, the Ramah, who says today we are not bucky and timing. And this is a very, very broad-ranging subject that we don't have time to go into. But there's a tenua, for lack of a better word, that people want to say, Bachal, Kalim today, all of these Kalim we have, they're not Balei time anyway. It says in Shulchan Aruch that you can taste it. Just taste it and see if there's tam basar in it. And look, by our Kalim, we don't have anything like that. When was the last time you're going to take some potatoes and cook it up in a fleshka keli at Ben Yemen? You're going to taste tam basar? You don't taste tam basar. Must be our Kalim are different. Maybe our Kalim don't really need to be kasher. Anyway, there's such a tenua, it's rejected by the poskim. And we normally say that it's our tam that is defective. If you have a person that can't smell, and then you give him basumim, so we don't say that the problem's with the basumim, we say the problem's with his nose. So for whatever the reason is, you have in the Gemara, so natul tam aperes, different things as a result of galus, whatever the case may be, that we don't have the ability to be tame. So that's what the Taz says. This whole thing does not apply anymore. There's no such thing as a yid tasting it to figure out whether there's tam basar in it or not, because we are not bucky. He quotes the Teres Chatas, we are not bucky. The Shach goes through the same discussion, but the Shach does not totally reject it, and the Shach says, bidi evid. If you cannot have somebody to taste it and say, okay, can I use this onion and milk soup or not, to taste it and see if it's fleshik? That you're not allowed to do. But if it just so happened that somebody tasted it, and they had to have tasted it in such a way that they were aware they had tam basar or not, so how is that going to happen unless somebody asked them to do it? Can you taste this? See if you can taste any basar in this, and doesn't tell them, and then you have bites of somebody trying to make a bidi evident to a lechatchil. Okay, but if it happened, for whatever reason it happened, the person ate it, and the person's able to say clearly there was no tam basar, and then it fell into a meichel, so then bidi evid, the shach is open to the idea of saying that it's going to be bottled, and then we'll rely on it. But just to rely on it like this, like the Mechaber brings, but as apashtus, the shachatas are not masking. However, it is important to point out, as we mentioned a number of times, when you learn a din, you have to see whether it's a din, even according to the Mechaber, it's a din. He doesn't use the word l'chatchila b'di'evet, but the way he phrases it, you can tell whether it's l'chatchila b'di'evet. This din is l'chatchila b'di'evet. No? Sneina silka shachotchem b'sakim shabbasim. That's l'chatchila b'di'evet.
B'di'evet.
B'di'evet, exactly. He's telling you a story. If you want to say l'chatchila, what would he say? Chaytech. Sneina silka b'sakim shabbasim. Then it would be a din l'chatchila. We don't say that. He said that sneina silka shachotchem, and it happened that they woke up b'sakim shabbasim. It's a bit of kach b'kach the din. Now, the Nesa came, they do bring it down in some cases where it's not the mamish esor chomer. So sometimes it brings down the mushal, lagabe, the 9 days, the mushal, that you have some flesh fell into a parva food. Okay, the Shabbos, there was a little flesh that fell in by accident into the parva soup, whatever the case is. So on Shabbos you can taste it, and you see if there's tam basar in it, and you shouldn't eat it from alav malka. Or on Sunday night for supper. Okay, if there is no tam basar, so then we'll be mat during the 9 days. Mishnah Berel brings down such a hechatimtza that would be sufficient. So this is the Taz we mentioned before. Lamaisa, we are not bucky, and the Shach brings from Rishain the chatchila. You shouldn't taste the onion in order to eat it with milk, but the yavid. If somebody tasted it and there was no tam basar, And then later on, the onion got mixed in, so then we'll be matir. But otherwise, l'chatchila, to be machmir, we are not going to allow. Okay, let's just finish over here. Sif, we have another part of the Ramah. I think we better take a break. It's long enough. We're gonna take a 10-minute break, Mirz Hashem, and we'll come back afterwards. Say there, any questions? Okay, please remind me to put back the recording. Okay?
What do we do? Go ahead, close that.
Okay, gentlemen. Welcome back. Let us presume we still didn't finish Sif Aleph. Okay, so we have to move along a bit here. We have over here in the Ramah, we have another part in the end of this Ramah, which actually has everything we're learning really, but has very practical applications. And in fact, even if you didn't make a mistake, some practical applications. So what do you do in the case of safek? Now, in general, we have a klolim regarding sveka deraisa l'kula, sveka deraisa l'chumanas, sveka derabbanan l'kula. But we have machlekes whether b'chlal this whole inyan of a dover charif is midiraisa midrabbanan. The Pri Chodesh and others, Pri Shenim, that holds it's midiraisa b'chlal. So the fact that it's a suffix is not enough to be matir. But nevertheless, the Ramah says, Azlinun l'kula. So why is it Azlinun l'kula? So we have a number of reasons, as the Ramah goes now, and to explain some of the reasons that we have that one might want to be makel, that one is allowed to be makel in such a case. So they're selling radishes. So if it's a whole radish and you see the thing was pulled from the ground and it wasn't cut, then obviously there's no problem. There's some greenery on top of it, and it comes to a point, the root of a radish is comes very thin on the bottom, and it's fine. But let's say they cut off that piece on the bottom, or you see that somehow it was cut. It was cut on the top, it was cut on the bottom. What exactly happened? So to say that it's a sveka deraisa l'kula, that we can't say, because we say sveka deraisa l'chumra. So how we make it over here? Because we assume that the instrument used to cut was not treif. That we assume that this cut was made with a marba chatzina. Marba chatzina are like digging implements, a hoe, a shovel, whatever the case was. When they dug it out of the ground, so we assume that that's what got it cut, and they don't eat their lunch with a shovel. It's only used to get things out of the ground, so there's no isser that was balei alachatchila. It's not an eating implement, and it was cut with something like that. So we assume that it was cut with something which was kosher. And the emes is
it's cut with a saw.
that in today's factories, lamashal, when you're dealing with things which are manufactured, so you're getting something creates on a factory. So in general, the cutting, the knives which are there, I mean, it depends which type of factory. And if you're talking about something made in China, then all bets are off because they don't follow clothing of other places. But in many locations, when you're dealing with let's say you're talking about, we'll talk about it more at the end of the simon because we need to learn till sifhei in order to talk about this. But you have these cut salads and cut fruit in a supermarket. Are you allowed to buy such cut fruit in a treifa supermarket? Do we have to worry about the knives that they're using? And even charif, not charif, maybe it needs hadacha. What's the din of these things? But one thing is clear, that there's a difference between when you're talking about a supermarket or you have in Montreal the Depanneur, 7-Eleven, the 7-Elevens don't have that, but we have plenty of places in Montreal that they're selling fruit and they're selling cut fruits and cut vegetables, and they're chopping up treifas and the velas in the back and different sorts of things which are not kosher. But when it's a place which is just cutting vegetables and it's a factory, you're getting something from Bird's Eye, frozen vegetables, the chances that they're cutting something treif over there are almost non-existent. Now, it depends what kind of factory, and it depends which place the factory is, and so on and so forth. But that is a dogma to the sort of situation you have in Marav Chatzina. So the heter of eating these tzaneines, because very, very common they end up being cut. And they have no other reason to cut them. Now, in today's environment, when you're buying things in a supermarket or a fruit and vegetable store, and they want to make everything look nice, so very often they will use knives in order to cut it, in order to make it look better. You know, if you go to the farmer's market and you get a whole bunch of radishes, so it might be that they're there together with the roots and together with the top and everything together. But if you're buying in the supermarket, they need shelf space, and it could be they cut it and to make it look nicer, they're washing it, they're cutting it. Then you have more of an issue with nice. So that's the Ramah is. So what about those places where you cannot depend that it's being cut by Marav Chatzina, something which is not used for treifa food, they're using a socket. So what's the din? If something was cut with a treifa socket, so what's the din? So l'chatchila, like we learned before in the Ramah, we're in Cheshul Das Rashba, and we answer the whole thing. Okay, but b'diavad, we're matter with kedei natila. So if the only place to buy them is places where they're cutting with a socket, so therefore negan like say la'atir all you did until samakim, till samakim. So therefore, the minig is to buy them and to allow it. When you take kedei natila, the place where it was cut, you cut off kedei natila, because we're a davar charif b'diavad will only answer kedei natila. You're buying it. So what kind of b'diavad is this? It's a l'chatchila. Who asked you to buy it? So we don't answer people. This is also a klal to say, so don't eat snaim. So once you have a situation that you cannot obtain it any other way, that's what the Ramah says. If you can get the ones that are not cut with a knives and get those, then it's not a b'diavad. Okay, but if it's the only type of radishes that are around, we don't say don't eat radishes. You can eat radishes. It's a b'diavad case already, and therefore you can take it, do a kedei natila. And we had the situation before Pesach, we're buying chrein. So the people that are not aware were so machmer with different sorts of inyanim, all sorts of chumras on top of chumras in Pesach. And you have something which is mamish masarikar and people not aware. If they go to the store and they go to a goyish the vegetable store, and the people have chrein there, and the chrein is cut with the knife from the goyish store. A davar charif. Maybe a davar charif. Maybe it was used to cut some pickles that were made with chametz vinegar, some pickled fish, something else which is chametz stick, something else which is treif. Okay,
So
in any case,
if you're buying it
you have to take it. So if you can get ones that are not cut with a knife, okay, they had to get it out of the ground somewhere, somehow. So but pashas, they got it out. But Marav Chatzina, people don't take a knife from their kitchen. Even in an industrial kitchen, you got a big knife, and they're going to go to the field and cut the horseradish out of the ground with it. They're using some sort of farming implements to get it out of the ground, and that's the bachal that's in you from Marav Chatzina. But if you see that it was cut with a knife, that they cut it clean, they're cutting it into pieces. There's the big one, they cut it into smaller slices, something like that. So you get one which is not cut. If the only chrein you have is that which is cut, so then you buy it, but you have to take off kedei natila. So you're not allowed to buy it if there's available chrein that was not cut. But if the only chrein that's available is chrein that was cut, so then you're allowed to buy it, but you have to take kedei natila. You have to cut off 2 centimeters from the place where the knife touched. We don't know what kind of knife they used. Question.
What's the guarantee? What's the guarantee? What's the guarantee that you're buying it in a kosher supermarket? That they're not in la dersaf, no?
It depends. If there's no hashgacha there, so then it's like a problem. There's an issue, but we need to know what to do in the supermarket. Depends what you're buying. we need to get to the end of the simon. We have other things to talk about. But if it's something which is under Ashkacha, that's the job of Ashkacha to make sure that the things are being taken care of properly. The main control over these places to control the knives. That's the main control. Knives, cutting boards. Got to the cutting board at the end of the ship. Got it, let's go further. Okay, so part of the study that enter into the equation when we're dealing with cases of sfeikus like this is, as I said at the beginning of the shir, that we have days that we don't necessarily paskin like them lechatchila, but then when it comes cases of suffolk, so then it comes into play. We have a din of a sfeikus sometimes, we have a sfeik of the dinner, we have all the rishonim that are makel, and we can bring them in as studim that since there's a suffix, and probably it was coupled with something kosher anyway. So then we start taking other things. So first of all, you're cutting tsnein. Okay, so tsnein. So if you remember that stam kelim of the goyim is b'nei Yeman, yeah, but the Maram Rottenberg held that was only chiltis, not tsnein. So it's another sad. So we have first of all, yitochen shenechta pekli adam of alei besakim. It is possible that it was cut by Marav Chatzina. Second of all, we have Dasa Maram, the Bechal, this whole Indian of Eina Ben Yeme, even of a Kobar Sakin who says it was a Ben Yeme, and if it's Eina Ben Yeme, we have Dasa Maram Rottenberg, that the only Chumra of Eina Ben Yeme is for Chiltis, not for Tznein, not for any other Dover Charif. So these are the studim that he put together, that the Ramah put together into this heter. Okay, because you're going to take you'll take a day natila, but we also who says b'chal the whole thing is asik. So lechatchila we want to be after the whole thing, but we have tzdadim to say b'chal who says the whole thing. Say maybe it's saying a ben yemei, maybe the din is like the maram. Okay, and maybe a b'chal was not cut with anything which was used to issa. Maybe the whole thing was okay. Okay, so the dafka she'ena yadei shesakim ben yemei. So that's if you don't know it was a ben yeme. If you know it was a ben yeme, so this heter goes out the window. So that's why it's a case of a suffix over here. You don't know that it was because it's not mitzdarif. If you know there was a ben yeme, even the maram is not allowing it. Okay. Now we have shar dvarim charifim. So we have the same first suffix is the same thing. That maybe it was cut b'marav chatzina, liyadoma, not asakim. And then, remember, Das Rabbeinu Yechiel, so he didn't make it into the Mechaber Ramah, but he shows up here again, the Neisa Kalim point out. The Rabbeinu Yechiel said, the Chutz mitznein v'sela came to Dover Charif. Okay, so when you're talking about Tznein, buying Tznein, okay, so then we don't have this heter. For Tznein, you have to go to the right-hand side of the screen. Okay, you have to use this heter from Maram, that's a Ben Yeme. But that's not going to work if it's a Ben Yeme. But if it's not Tznein, then even if it's a ben yeme, you could be matir. Why? Because first of all, you also have two sfeikus. Maybe it was done by marav chatzina, but klei adama, and then maybe we have the das. We could be mitzvah. If the das Rabbeinu Yechiel, there it doesn't. It only applies to tznein and selek, and things like onions and other things don't apply. So that won't help you. If it's tznein, if it's a ben yeme, it's not going to help you. But for things which are not tznein, so then it could help you the das of Rabbeinu Yechiel. Okay. And now you're passing like this also, you could end up having the differences in different achshadim in many of these dinim. And this really goes throughout all of kashrus and throughout when you see machlekes aposkim in different days and how far you're going to be makel. And especially over here, we'll see later on what is exactly considered a davar charif, what is not a davar charif, borderline davar charif. You'll have differences with different achshadim depending on the sheet of the Rabbi Machshir. Sometimes it depends on their definition, what's hefsed meruba, but whatever the case is, there are different standards very often. So this, if it's not snein or selek, or chiltis obviously, so then even if you know it was a ben yemi, there's still an asinus mokum to be makel, as long as you're not sure. If you're sure it's a davar shalisir, then it was covered sakin shalisir, then you have no way around it. Okay.
As a question?
Yeah.
So based on that, isn't a kol shekein v'chal v'chomer that if you see, like, let's say cut watermelon, which is
We're going to get to
Certainly
that,
not
but
a
we
double
have to
cut.
wait till the end of the simon. We're going to talk about the end of the simon. We have to get there then. We're going to talk about cutting other things by the end of the simon. It's a fate. See, there's a chat over here. When you cut Kadena Tilak in the knife that's cutting through the clip, you receive a problem. So that it'd be better put these messages so everybody can see the question. Question was, if you cut off Kadena Tilak, so then you're not cutting the part, you're not touching through the part. If you have over here, a cucumber. Let's say you have to take off Kadena Tilak. Okay, so we're worried that down to here it became usher, so you're going to cut below the part where it's usher. So we're worried that the tam went through from here to here, Kadena Tila, so then you're going to cut through over here. So you're not going to touch the part with the zisser. Otherwise, taka will be a problem. You're going to ask the knife that you're using to cut off the Kadena Tila. It has to cut in a place where there's heter. Okay, Sif base. So Sif Aleph was talking about things which clearly Medina Dir Gemara considered over Charif. Tznain and Silka were mentioned in the Gemara Chum. But now what about everything else? So that's Sif base. So Krishin is taking up Tam Cheshakain Chrein. That's our horseradish. So garlic, onions, and horseradish. Or other similar types of dvarim charifim. Let's say you have sour fruit. We'll soon talk about lemons. You have with a sharp taste. Or you have heavily salted fish. Stam herring that you could eat. We're not talking about very, very salty herring. Dinim shavel chadach betznein. So we don't paskin. Mechaber does not paskin like Rabbeinu Yechiel, who says that it only applies to the things mentioned in the Gemara. We paskin like the other Rishonim that hold that other dvarim charifim are also included in the same category, and that's why we have all these issues in our kitchens with the onions. The Ramah is mikol makom mutal lechol merkachas charifim shleiv de kachavim k'gen zangvil k'yetz. Zangvil is ginger. So they used to make some sort of cooked food. The guy used to make out of zangvil, some sort of ginger production. Why is that? The yeshlam kelim yachadim lakach. This is the original makar that for what we mentioned before about factories that have designated equipment that they're using only for things which are mutter. Or tolshin, I say, or they either use special kalim only to cut the ginger, or they're just pulling the ginger out of the ground and therefore they don't need to use a knife whatsoever. So that's we see over here from the Ramah that ginger is also in the same category. We're talking about fresh ginger. Fresh ginger also has a sharp taste. The shaila is you have things with peros chamutzim, dagim maluch, and these sort of things. Where exactly do you draw the line? How are you going to determine what's considered over charif and not a dover charif? The Prima Gadam makes up a shtickle seder with different categories of things. He wants to say, okay, so here the Taz points out this whole problem over there. So he brings down this of a heter was from we mentioned in our Hagdama that Ramah is often quoting this of a heter is from the late Rishonim that were giving the Minig Ashkenaz. And he brings down tabuchim chamutzim likram dover charif. Let's say you have sour apples. You have these green apples that have a sour taste to it, but you can eat the apple. People eat the apples as it is, just because it has a little bit of a sour taste, so therefore it becomes a dover charif. So the Taz says that Makam Hefsitz, he's not backing off the psaken and mechaber that peros chamutzim are considered to be a dover charif. Lemons we're soon going to see in the mechaber, but here we're talking about apples with a sour taste. So, since this of a heter says that they're not included in this category, peros chamutzim, so therefore makam hefsid, Even though Machaber said you have to treat it like an onion or like radishes, whatever the case is, so Makam Hefsa the Taz said you can rely on it. And then they said the Prima Garden makes a couple of categories. So you have a davar charif ma'id, which you could define as something she'ena roya lechol chai, that people don't eat it raw. Now, what does it mean people don't eat things raw? So onions, well, I mean, people eat raw onions. Take raw onions and you chop it up and you put it in a tuna fish salad, but you don't eat it by itself. Garlic, you can also chop up, you crush it, and you eat it raw. But people take the munch. There are people that eat whole cloves of raw garlic, but they're not eating garlic. But they're not having raw garlic as a snack, a normal snack. And if they are, then it's bottled item. So even people that eat raw onions, so you have raw onions for bison, for brengen. They say in Ruslan, in Russia, the Yidden, it was very common food, raw onions. Okay, both my parents loved to eat raw onions. Okay, but even them, you don't take an onion and peel it and then bite into it like you bite into an apple. You take it, you eat it with some bread, you eat it with something else. It's the farbison have to say l'chaim. It's not nechol chai like a regular food is nechol chai. Chrein, you grind it and you put on the food, on the fish, whatever. It's also nechol chai. Okay, but even a Pesach where we eat it, it's not the mitzvah. That there are those that have a whole shaila, make a whole shaila in the chrein. How can you make an adama on it? It's not royal achila, but you should make a shahakal on it. It's takev, the Mesamim, it's not them that in Russia they would eat the onions raw. So you look in many of the achareinim, they say on a raw onion, make a shahakal. According to Rebbe, on a raw onion, make an adama. Okay, you have shitas harizal, you always make brachas and yochades. Okay, but raw ginger, so you can take raw ginger and you can grind it, you can do something with it, but to take a piece of raw ginger and cook and chew on it. So herring is not the type of dog maluchim we're talking about over here. We're talking about dog maluchim that they're not eaten on their own. Even herring, to take herring, you have it not on a crack or something like that. Okay, but that's something which is charif made. Then you have other things which are not so charif. There's a type of fruit that's a chomutz. You have pickles. Okay, what's with pickles? So pickles you can eat by themselves. Okay, do they have charifas? So they have charifas. They're pickled. That's why they call them pickles. On the other hand, the people that eat them, bifnei atzmi, and they eat it just the way it is, without any other accompaniment. So therefore, we have more room to be makel. So those things that are not even eaten raw, so they're unquestionably in the category of tznein and silka. So unquestionably, Rabbi Yechiel doesn't agree. But Lamaisa, and the way the Machaber paskins, then we conclude all of them in that same category. When you have things which are lower levels, like you see from the Taz, Makam Hefsid, you could be Mekel, so you can be Mitztarif, and there are many things which are in that category. So you have, for example, olives. So olives, so you look at Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Pesach. So the Alter Rebbe, we learn out the dinim of Davar Charif from the Alter Rebbe's description of olives. So Alter Rebbe says olives are Davar Charif. In order to take out some of the charifas, so they soak them in water. Okay, once they soak them in water, it has a different status. So what happens? The olives today that we eat, they're not soaked in water necessarily. They're soaked in brine. They're soaked in salt. They're soaked in vinegar. They're soaked in something else in order to make them edible. Okay, so what's their status? So lechatchila, we also consider them to be. So the Shach has a whole discussion about the Shach, the Prima Garden. You have lemons. Also, when see in Machaber, the din of lemons. So lemons, the people eat raw lemons. So you can take lemons and you squeeze out the juice, but then you don't drink the lemon juice just like it is. You mix some sugar into it, water into it. It's not mamish. So it is normally, we consider lechatchila all these things to be a dover charif. The shaila about scallions, the poskim speak about all different things. You look in the Sefer dover charif, you look at Darkei Tshuva, look at all the svarim, all different diyunim through the centuries about whether something is called dover charif or not, because it makes a very, very big difference. And something was cut and people mixed up the knives. There's even days that say eggplants is considered to be a dover charif. So Mistam, it depends. We're soon going to have a discussion in the Shulchan Aruch about lefes, but I'll just mention something I once heard from Zalman Shimon from Dvorkin Al Bashon. So he used to paskin that the carrots that carrots, as far as the dinner of Bishul Akum are concerned, if a guy cooked carrots, it's a problem with Bishul Akum. Things which are Nacholim Chai, there's no Bishul Akum. So if a guy made applesauce, so it's mutter because the apples are Nachol Chai. You can eat them without cooking them. So therefore, if a guy cooked the apple, there's no way it's a Bishul Akum. So he used to answer it. So I once was speaking with him about it. So I asked him, "Is it true what they say?" He says, "About it." He says, "You ever saw people eating raw carrots?" I said, "Every day people eat raw carrots." See, they're talking about the late Lameds, early Mems. We're talking about. So sure, people eat. He says, "Well, so I'm sure a bottle diet. The person eats raw carrots." I walked away. I didn't have any idea what was going on. Then later on, he went to Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi sent him as the shliach, so say potato. So he came back. So he tells me, "Can't believe it." But I saw with my own eyes people eating raw carrots. So what's pshat? So the carrots. I don't know if you ever had big carrots. You ever see the places where Abdul that they feed the horses carrots? There are these huge carrots, and the carrots you ever buy. Sometimes you buy carrots in the store. You get this big carrot, and it tastes very, very bitter. But pashtus in Russia, that's where tzimis came from. They weren't just trying to make the carrots taste better. They're making the carrots edible. The carrots were not edible raw. They were bitter. There was a certain charifus to it. So therefore, to extrapolate from what it says in Poskim, what's charif, what's not charif, the foods to a large degree have changed. Lagabe, the way they were in the past. So it can't always be done from one to another. And one way of judging it is a person comfortably eating this thing by itself, or a person wants to have it together with something else. And again, we have different madregas. So once you have something which is not chorif ma'ed, so then you have stadim, you could be mekel, hefsid, and so on and so forth. You have more room to move in order to find some sort of kul. Siv Gimel. Tavlin. Shenadeicho b'madeicho shel Bosor ben Yemen. Remember now, the Mechaber is passing like the Maram Rottenberg Baker, that he's only worried if it's a Ben Yemen. If it's Ein Ben Yemen, he's only worried if it's Chiltis. So since we're not talking about Chiltis, because we don't even know exactly what Chiltis is anyway. So he's only worried when you have you're crushing spices and you're using it on a crushing board, mortar and pestle, whatever it is, and it's fleshik. It's ben yeme that you use to chop, to slice hot meat. So there's a blia, there's an absorption of bosor, and it's a ben yeme. Within the last 24 hours, there was a blia to absorb hot meat. And now you took tavlim, and the tavlim with over charif, and you crushed them in a meducha shel bosor ben yeme. Also lachem b'chalav. You cannot use these spices with chalav. Same din of a sakin, duchta sakina, also applies to the duchka shenideicha b'meducha. And the Rama is, don't forget, the opinion that even if it's ein ben yeme, like we learned before, that applies not only to chiltis, that it applies to other foods as well. So the Shach and Tas over here point out that l'chura there's a stira in the Mechab. Okay, according to Rama, if it's ein ben yeme, the Rama says you're not allowed to have it with milchiks. But according to the Mechaber, if it's ein ben yeme, there's no problem. He only said if it's a ben yeme, it's a problem. If it's ein ben yeme, it's not a problem. That comes out from the Mechaber. But you look in Hilchas Taruv, Siman Kuf Gimel. So this Sif Vav over here, there's no Sif Vav in our Siman. It's a Sif Vav from Siman Kuf Gimel, Hilchas Taruvas. So the Mechaber brings down the following din. Yesh Mishaymer, the kitzur is that we see over there, it looks like the Mechaber is machmer with ein ben yeme. That's the apparent contradiction. Yesh Mishaymer is an opinion that Sheim Sama Pilpulin, Bekeder Shel Iser, Sheina Bas Yema. If you took pilpulin with peppers, and these are hot peppers, they're dover charif, and you put them in a pot, a treifa pot. Hilchos Taruvos is not talking about bas b'chol, it's talking about iser. Okay, so you put it in a treifa pot, and the treifa pot is a ben yeme treifa pot. Ha kol aser. It's also why the chorfa mashva l'shvach, because the sharpness of the pilpulin is going to take the tampogim that was in the walls of the Eina Ben Yema Pat, and it's going to make it a tam meshubach. Hey, what's going on over here? That's what the Ramah said. Machaber said not like that. This is by us in Sim Tzadik Vav, it's a machlek of Machaber Ramah, and we said that the Machaber is only worried about it if it's chiltis. But if it's not chiltis, then as long as Eina Ben Yema, we're not worried about it. Chiltis will turn Eina Ben Yema into Ben Yema. That's what we know from the Gemara and the Beit Zora. And the Paskins, we don't go past that, like the Maram Rottenberg. And then suddenly over here, it's Eina Ben Yema, and here he's answering the whole path. What's going on over here? So the Shach and Taz bring down this stira. So they resolve it. There's only an apparent stira, obviously. So there must be a difference between these two cases. And there's three different approaches that they bring, how to resolve the difference. And how you resolve this difference ends up being a big nafkamina. I mean, according to the Ashkenazim, a Paskin Eina Ben Yema is anyway a problem, so it's not so much of a nafkamina. But according to those that go after the Sfardim, go after the Psakim and Ramachaber, so then how you resolve this has a very major impact. What happened now? Did we just expand the whole Isser that we thought we had a big kula from Tzadik Vav, from our Simon, and the Machaber, and we did away with it in Hilchos Taruvos? So, what does he hold? And Hilchos Bosor B'chalav, he says okay, and Hilchos Taruvos says not okay. What's going on? So, what's the resolution? So, there's three approaches. So, approach number one, that Hachra Shulchan Aruch L'Hakim. Simukov Gimel Hevi Machmirim Kedas Yochid. You see, he says over here Yesh Mishaim. Yesh Mishaim means Yesh Mishaim. So Yesh Mishaim. There's somebody that holds like that. It's very interesting. Somebody holds there, even if it's Eina Ben Yema, it's also. But I already told you in Hilchos Bosor B'chalav that the ikar is that it's not a problem. So I said there is somebody that says there is a problem. Okay, fine, there is. So therefore, you don't have to worry about it if it's Eina Ben Yema, Azay Kum Tois. But as we said earlier, by the Yesh Eim Sefalef, the Yesh Mishaimer, that when it's brought in isolation like this, and Kloli Aposkim, to say that he's quoting this and making a separate sif on his own, the Mechaber doesn't hold like this Chumrah, very difficult to say. He's bringing down the Yesh Mishaimer. So this first resolution, not really accepted by most Achrim. A second difference, make a besakim of a machmer b'bishul. What's the difference? Well, there are a few differences. But one difference between the top din that says that it's okay, and the bottom din, Hilchos Taruvos, said it's not okay, Eina Ben Yema, is that top case is talking about Tuchik the Sakina. There's no heat. Whereas the din in Hilchos Taruvos is some appeal from the Kedera Shalisser, that you cooked it together. And therefore, the Machaber, since in general timing get transferred through heat, so therefore he answers it in such a case. But he's matter in the case of Duch the Skin, which also obviously has its difficulties, like we said before, that by Duch the Skin that it takes out, as Rashi explained in the Shulchan Aruch quoted earlier in Sif Aleph, that it brings our Iker Shel Tam, and not just the nascent Tam. When it comes to Bishul, it's not the same sort of Tam. And a third explanation, Shach brings all these different explanations, that the difference is that we're talking in the Tabtin, we're talking in Hilchos Bosor B'chalav, we're talking about Heter. The Bosor is about the Bosor Mutter, and in the bottom case, we're talking about the union of Visser. So it's not exactly not Barnat, because as we learned before, we hold this that it's not the same as the union of not Barnat, it's taking out the Ikar Tam. But nevertheless, we're still more makel when it comes to a heter than we are with a Isser. And therefore, if it's an Eina Ben Yema of a Dvar Isser, so then the Mechaber, according to this last explanation, the Mechaber will be Machmer. But if we're talking about Bosor or Chalav, you're talking about a Dover Shel Heter, so then the Mechaber would be Mekel. According to Ashkenazim, we treat both the same. That's the Ramah Achmer. The Ramah always says Eina Ben Yema is a problem, It doesn't make any difference according to Bnei Ashkenaz, but according to the Sfardim, it does make a difference. And the whole discussion of Svardish Poskim, what is it they hold? Okay, it's getting late. We'll take some questions hopefully at the end, but we have a lot of ground to cover.
The ducha is a knife?
I don't want to, I'm sorry, I have to leave questions for the end. I'm really sorry, but I don't want to leave leftover pieces here. So let's first finish and hopefully we'll have some time at the end. We have 2 sifim left, and then we have some other issues to cover. Sif Daled, May Lemonis. When you see in Laz and Rashi, very often they'll have a shin. It's really a sin. You have an old French, so lemons. Don't pronounce it anyway. In any case, lemon juice. It used to be something that the Nachrim would make barrels, whatever, full of lemon juice. And the question is, how did they make this lemon juice? You have to cut open the lemons in order to squeeze out the juice. What did they cut the lemons with? They're cutting with knives. So what's with the lemon juice? If they cut it with a second shalisser, so we have a problem. Well, we're treating these lemons as a dover charif or not. So we do consider them to be a dover charif. So what's the story? Is that as far as the lemon juice, Chavius probably goes on both of them, that you bring the herring in barrels, which also happens today. They also bring the herring in barrels. They're packed by goyim over there. Mutarim, says the Machaber. Why are they mutarim? So Ramah says a cryptic word over here. They bring a lot of them. Why not community? They bring a lot of them. What difference to bring a lot of them? So we'll soon see. There's two potential problems to avoid. Remember, with a second, we have 2 potential problems. We have the problem of a davar charif, and it's going to take out the tam of the davar isir. And the other problem we have is about the surface. Maybe there's some schmutz on the surface. So if it's schmutz on the surface, so then you're going to cut then harbe yachad. So then it makes sense. Yeah, harbe beyachad. Even if the first ones became asur, at least the klipa, that because we have some shamnunis over there, the schmutz, the treif schmutz on the surface of the knife came off on the lemons. So maybe some of them became asur over there. But came. So then the knife got already cleaned up by the first lemons that were cut. So they don't have to worry about the schmutz in the later lemons. That the time of the sakin already became bottle after the first lemons were cut. So what's going on? Wait a second. The time became, there was mavatal. Like what exactly is going on over here? Okay, so again, we have certain has baited about what in the world is going on over here. So the Bach holds the heter is because the charif shenachta b'keli sheina ben yemei. Okay, that we're going to be makel over here, says the Bach, because we have the Maram Mottenberg was not worried about Eina ben Yemei except for chitas. Okay, and this is lemons. Lemons is further down the line, certainly from chiltis, even from Snein and Silka, and even from Batzel V'Shum. It's much less than that. So, okay, so it's Eina ben Yemei. You still have to worry about the schmutz. Okay, the schmutz we're not worried about because they did harbe b'yachad, and that's the hezber for the Ramah. Okay, that's one answer of Bach. And the Shach brings 2 truths. That the lemons ain't charifim kolkach. Maflitim rak mat tam midafnas hasakim. So since they're not so sharp, they only take out a little bit of the tam from the sakim. V'lachem mispatel b'limunim harashem. So not all the time is going to come out in lemon number 1. A little bit, it could be lemon number 1, a little bit more lemon number 2, until finally, after the first 10 lemons, who knows how much it is, but after a couple of lemons go by, a relatively small number of lemons, there's no time left. So that's pshat mipnei shemavim harbe yachad. Since it's not so sharp, says the Shach. So therefore, it matters. Quantity matters. You do a lot of lemons, so then the time is already going to have nothing left. It's going to be expended in the first couple of lemons, and then there's not going to be anything left to treif up the rest of the lemon. Then a second teretz the shach brings, lemuna mitten lahakim. Okay. According to this biur, it's a fact that they were bringing lemon juice. And the fact is that Yidden were buying it. So the Ramah is basically, he's telling you also a story. It's talking about the minig. They were doing it and people were buying it. Their mutter, people were using it. So why? The minig is lahakal, that since there are days that say that Ben Yemi is okay, they're the ones that say the lemons are not such a davar charif anyway. So the people that are neig lahakel nisbach hadasam mekilim v'af yitochen sheishtamshu b'kli miyuchet. There's another possible heter that they're in the lemon juice business, and that who says it's anything worse than the people that were making ginger in the previous sif, and they had kelim yuchadim. If you're in the lemon making business, you have your own knives to use. And according to that, it's not a general. It's not a general heter. According to the other terutzim, it could go beyond just lemon juice. But according to this answer of shach, so then it only applies to this where the minig is. Yeah, it's also a question: how does Dag Malech fit into the picture? This is mainly the explanation. What's with the lemon juice? And again, it depends how charif it is. According to the second teretz, depends how salty the dag is. I mean, with the salt is considered over charif is also a whole discussion. Anyway, there's no mock in the Gemara from this. This is Shiboli Aleket. You look in Berel, the Gdeiler Shenim. The earlier Shenim, he brings this down. But that's as far as lemons are concerned. Now, Sif Hey is going to be more. Oh, we have the Ramah over here. Excuse me. So the rest of the Ramah. Maybe this is sauerkraut. Kruv is cabbage. The sauerkraut is cut into little pieces. It looks like they were pickling, possibly is what it is. Kruv, cabbage that was somehow made charif. Avagav the poros v'chotoch, and even if it's cut, some places k'tas mekemis, they're eating this kruv too. V'yesh mekemis shemachmirim b'zeh and l'shanos minig. So there are different minhagim in this. And again, whether you could use any of these reasons, because it's not so sharp, they're using kelim yuchadim, but one of the other hatadim, some places they'll rely on that for this cabbage, and some places they don't. So if you have apples or other types of dried vegetables that are not sharp, there's no reason to be machmir when the goyim are producing things en masse. Pashas, there's no davar charif, so you don't have to worry about the belia, and you don't have to worry about the shemnunas either, because they're doing this industrially and they're using large amounts of it, and therefore you don't really need to worry. So again, the shaila, when you're talking about cut fruit in the supermarket, we still need to do sefei. So let's do for a sefei, and we'll come to that. Taz points out of them, he doesn't bring down places that are machmer with lemon, only with cabbage. But the Taz says that since the two are basically in the same category, halachically they're no different. So the places that are machmer on the kruv should be machmer on the lemon juice, says the Taz. Because since the logic is the same for both the lemon juice and for the cabbage, so it goes after the mekemes, not the mitzias. Is there less or more likelihood that they're going to use kelim yuchadim, for example, with the cabbage as opposed to the lemons? The difference is, are you relying on dasa mekilim? So if you are, then you can rely on both, and if you're not, you shouldn't rely on both. Okay, sifhei. So now we're getting to different sorts of foods which are not charif. So we understand, let's get back to the practical case. You're traveling and you want to buy some cut fruits or vegetables. There's celery there, there's watermelon there, there's all different things which are cut fruits and vegetables. What's the story with taking it? So first of all, it's that in the category of a factory. So in general, it's not. If something is in a factory, they're doing only one type of thing, it's one thing. But in the supermarket, for example, so they have a meat section, and they have a fish section, and they have a vegetable section. They have all different sorts of sections there. So to depend that they're using only one type of knife for each sort of thing is mistam and not shaykh. So you could have an issue. But the shaila is what happens after they cut it. And what do you have to do, if anything? So sif, hey. Chatach kishoyim besakin shobas. Let's say it was cut with a fleshka knife. Heter. Okay? We don't even worry about this over here. It's a heter. Are you allowed to eat it? Kishoyim, let's say there's some debate about it, but let's say that it's cucumbers. Exactly what it is. Kishoyim with different types of squashes, and different types of kishoyim. Anyway, different types of kishoyim. But it's something which, whether it's a squash or whether it's a cucumber, it's still something which is not a dover charif. Now, there are those that want to say that kishuim have a little charifus in it, but we hope that they don't have any charifus. You're allowed to use these cucumbers. They'll cover a fleshik knife with milk. Begrade the bilvar. And all you have to do is grade. They just have to scrape them. So you still have to scrape them. Now, so that's very nice. So you see this cucumber on the bottom, right? So you see it was covered with a fleshka knife. It's got a red handle, fleshka knife, they cut it. Okay, so if you bought the big piece on the right, so then grade the heichetases. So you don't even have to take matila that you get off the whole thing at once. You just scrape off the surface. You got to take off one layer, and then you can eat the rest. Okay, but let's say you're stuck with these little slices that are on the left. You're going to scrape both sides of them. You're gonna end up with bloody fingers, or you're gonna end up with the cucumber. And let's say they cut up a salad for you into little pieces. Let's say it's an Israeli salad, it's gorgut. It's not shaykh. You can't do grade on that. Anyway, you need grade. Now here's now very fascinating. So exactly what lefis is it turnips or is it something else? Lefis is not a dover chad. But lefis has some sort of taste. It's described by the poskim as having a mesikus to it. It has a taste that's not mamish charif, but it does have a taste. So listen what happens over here. Amazing. The flois obey. If before you cut the kshuim, you cut lefis. So it went like this. Bosor, lefis, kshuim. So what happens? You don't even need to scrape the cucumbers. Why? You only need to rinse them off. Why? Because the lefis jumped in the middle and is mevatel tam bosor. And not only not only if you got kishum lefis, so you had tam bosor in the knife. And then you cut lepes, and then you cut snain. So we know from Sif Aleph says din of the Gemara. It's not the din of the Gemara. We learned that you cut the snain with the fleshka knife. Okay, that it's going to be asr because of davar charif. But if you cut levis in between, then it's been mevatla shari badocha kamei lefes. All you have to do is rinse off the lefes, and all you have to do is rinse off the radish. Why? Lefisha tama lepis mishuna has a different taste of lepis. Mabatul tama nifla masakin. The taste that's coming out of the sakin is going to be affected by the taste of the lepis that was cut beforehand. And that's also in the Gemara. Remember, that was the last line of the Gemara. We didn't translate it. But that last line, we don't have time to go back to it right this second. I want to finish the siman. But that last line of that Gemara was talking about this din. So you say, how does this din come along and be mavatul din the Gemara? That's also the same Gemara. Same Gemara says that you have the lefis in between, that it changes the tam basa to the extent that it's not even going to affect the davar charif. The Rama adds over there, so it sounds like it'd be a great idea. You don't have to have separate knives. All you do, cut a piece of lefis and then do whatever you want. Keep a lefis around, a couple of liftas around, and then don't have to worry about messing up your whole kitchen. So Rama says, hang on a second. First of all, dafka lefis. Shetayim mishum has a different taste and only lefis. And since we don't know for sure what lefis is, it doesn't really help us too much. You cut something else in between, that doesn't work. And then vafilu belefes, even if it's the lefes, which does work, midina de gemara, all you get is one cut for one cut. One slice of lefes, one slice of tznein. You can't use the cut of lefes once and then cut one slice of tznein and then a second slice of tznein. No, you're gonna have to do lefes tznein, lefes tznein, lefes tznein. Yeah. You're gonna have to cut the lefes in between. So the whole thing is really not going to save you too much time, not going to save you too much trouble over here. It's really not going to work. Okay, so here's the way it goes. Here you cut the lefes, and here you cut the tznein. So one slice of tznein is good. You want to cut a bunch of slices of tznein, you're out of luck. You're going to have to cut some lefes in between. Each time you're going to have to cut some lefes. So it's dafka lefes, not anything else. And dafka only once. Therefore, this last case is not going to be good. So the shached, you shouldn't cut the lefes and that's tznein in order to have it with milk. So here they put this radishes on some cream cheese. So the din is that again, look at the lashon machaber. Chatach kishum. He's telling you a story. It's a din b'diavad. Chatach kishum b'sakin shabaser mutalachlan b'chalad. If it was already cut, then you can have it with greda. V'im chatach b'lefes. And if it has happened to be that you cut lefes beforehand, yeah, so then you're allowed to eat it. Okay, but lechatchila, you can't do the lefes as a way of being matzah. You can now have the radishes with milk. What's the din of the kfar chatach lefes? You happen to have cut lefes, so that's not b'diavad that you b'diavad already after lefes and already after the tznein. If you already cut the lefes, then you're allowed to cut the tznein. That's the way the shach. Very often we have a din, a b'diavad, and we don't know exactly how to define b'diavad. Okay, so now we're really sort of out of time, but I want to mention some very, very practical applications, again, that happen all the time. And if you have a difficult case, I highly recommend the Sefer Dover Charif. I mean, because you'll have a lot more shilas and shuvas that you're going to find in the Pisket Shuva and other Mefard, the Arket Shuva. You have more contemporary ones. We have a shaila as follows. So we know, you see on the right-hand side, we cut onion with a fleishka knife. So we know the tam Bosor goes into the onion, and now we got a fleishka onion. Now, you took this fleishka onion, and now you cut up the onion. It was cut in half. The person ran out before they made whatever they did with the onion. The person sees two halves of an onion. It's so good, I want to have it. Takes a milchik and knife and cuts up the onion. So now what happens? So you have tam Bosor went into the onion, and now you have tam chol went into the onion. So what do you have now? You have an onion that you can't eat anymore. It's possible chol. That's clear. That there's no shaila about. That is, unless you have chayes bittel and it's in a different place, you cut it more than kadei natila away from where it was. But if it were here, he's going through, he's cutting in the same place where the kadei natila would be. So this onion is shein fartik. Onion goes in the garbage. Nothing to do with the onion. But there's another shaila. What's with the milchik knife now? In other words, the tam that we know, there's a one-way street at least that's going from the keli into the food. Now, when you're cutting and the milchik knife is giving off tam cholav into the onion, is that tam Bosor that's nivla, that was already absorbed into the onion, is that capable of getting into the knife? So it's beleya. Is it capable of being mavliya too? So you look at Ilchas Pesach, so it looks like it's a problem. It looks like it's a problem. Look at the Magen Avraham. You look at it. It looks like it's a problem. Certainly lechatchila. Anyway, the whole machlekes achreinim, but certainly lechatchila we're machmer on such a thing. And then just mention a few shilas over here, which is just how it goes through the whole kitchen. And these are mamish everyday shilas. So here the tam bosor b'sak nichal batzel. Here the tam chol b'sak nichal batzel. But now the onion you can't eat. But what's with the knife? What's with the milchik knife? So therefore, you have to be machshir. Now, let's say you don't find out until later, so then you have a big shaila on your hands, very serious shaila. And that's why the dover charif. So many people, I would make a poll if I had time, but I always used to do this in seminar. I used to ask the students, how many of you have parva knives at home? Half the class would raise their hands. So the class that raised their hand says, I don't understand. How do you people not get mixed up with the dover charif? There's a half onion in the fridge. What are you supposed to do with it? You have to label every piece of onion. So yeah, everybody has to know this was covered in flesh, and it was covered in milk. We don't care. Parva is too confusing. So we don't see that that's less confusing. We think it's more confusing. But there's some people that if you do it like that, you have to take care. If you do it the other way, you have to take care. So here, let's say you have a parva cutting board, and here you use a flesh knife on it. What's with the cutting board? So Yev Shreibrim Sha'af Lachatz Chazak Nechshav Keduch the Skina. That even if you didn't cut it, but if you went on it with pressure, it has the din of duch of the skin of lachin yesh lachem magam benegei lekeresh achito. So let's say this was a parva cutting board, and you use a milchik knife on the parva cutting board. What's the din? So Dr. Tshuva brings on deis that we say that not only did the onion become milchik, that the cutting board became milchik. And lechatchila, certainly you have to be mach. What's b'diavad? What if you can't kasher? A different story. Can you kasher plastic? Can you not kasher plastic? Hopefully, at the end of next year, we'll talk a little bit about kashering things. But certainly lechatchila, this is the issue. So here you have on the left a vegetable slice. Another shilas. You have persons making a chayes. They have these blades. You have all different sorts of things. You have food processors and different sorts of things. Let's say this thing is made just for raw vegetables. So the person uses the whole thing. So a person wants to use it for Pesach. The person said, I use the whole thing only for vegetables. I only use raw vegetables, kosher Pesach vegetables. Okay, I do peels, but I'm not worried about. Let's say I only peel them before I put them in. Also, I only wash them with cold water too. So you don't have to worry about any bleach from the dishwasher. You don't have to worry about anything. So can I use it for Pesach? So what's the problem? How did you cut that onion? Even if you use the parva knife, but pasha it's a chametzik knife. So if you cut the onion with a chametzik knife, you have tam chametz which went into the onion. Okay, and now let's say those blades on that machine on the left are pesadik. You're going to cut the chametzik onions with the pesadik slicer. So the onions already from before were a problem. Okay, but here you were using this whole thing the whole year, and you only use the cold, and you only use them for vegetables. Now you want to use them for Pesach. But we have to worry that the duchka, the same duchka that put the tam chametz into the onions, put the tam chametz and the onions into the keli. Okay, so the emes is that there's a whole discussion whether the tam which is going from the food into the keli is the same thing or not. It's a whole big machlekes. You have Rabbi Kibega talks about it, you have Prima Godin talking about it, it's a whole ganze rash. Remember when we talked about nat bar nat, the applies to keli, but you have on a food, there's a go for nat bar nat, you have a potato which was cooked with fleshes, and then you have cooked it with some regular parva potatoes. Do we say nat bar nat that the tam bosor went into the potato, and then the tam bosor went from the potato into the other potatoes? Or do we say that if it's a eichel, you don't have such a thing? That's a whole other issue. And there are many issues when it comes to dover charif. These are just some of them, and to keep aware of it. One last thing that's worth mentioning is that b'chlal, once you cook an onion and the garlic, for that matter, so then if you put it in the pot and when it was raw, so then that's the din of a dover charif. But if it was already cooked and then you reheat it in something else, so the fact that it's an onion doesn't make it dover charif anymore. Once you cooked it, then it took out the charifah. So if you have an onion that the mushel was, you put an onion in chicken soup or something like vegetable soup, something like that, and was boiled in the soup. So then, when the first time you boiled it, you could say it's dover charif. But later on, you reheat it in something else. We don't say as dinner with dover charif anymore. It's not a problem. Okay, I went a little bit over. We'll take some questions over here. What are sour apples? Like the green apples, I think they're talking about. Or you could have apples that are not 100% ripe, could be sour. Our radish is a lot less spicy than onion. Depends what kind of radishes. Again, the tam, like I brought the example of the carrots. There are poskim that bring down the din of lefis. We spoke the din of lefis before you cut the snake. That the din of the lefis they say that the same thing applies to carrots. And carrots are like lefus. Okay, but they don't make carrots like they used to anymore. Or maybe they do make carrots, but they're feeding them to the horses, not to the people. So therefore, to extrapolate on the taste of foods, especially you're talking about radishes. Yes, radishes less spicy than onion. So I don't really know what kind of radishes they were talking about in the days of the Gemara and what type of onions there were in the days of the Gemara. It have onions now also. You have onions and radishes, different types of radishes, different types of onions. Some of them are much sharper than onions. You can have the same bag of onions, and you can have one onion which will make you cry, and the other one won't make you cry. So that's why to say this svara was Rabbi Yechiel, exactly what he held. It's difficult for us. We have to go by principles because many of the things. I mean, it's not the time to discuss it. But the Rambam, we say that we don't go by refuah shebashas. The Rambam said you can't go by refuah shebashas. And then the Shulchan Aruch said we can't go by the refuahs in the Rambam. And we still hold by the refuahs that they say Shulchan Aruch. The shaila is at what point do we not anymore? The Rebbe thinks Sicha. The Rebbe said in Shuas, everything it says in Torah is eternal. So what's pshat? It says the refuah shebashas in Rambam. We don't do it anymore. The Rebbe's masbeh that the din didn't change, and the halacha also didn't change, and mitzias that this particular herb is good for this particular condition also didn't change. We don't have these herbs anymore. Things change over time. When people say, does Torah believe in evolution? So Torah doesn't believe in macroevolution, one species turning with another species, but microevolution, that species are constantly evolving within the same species, is an observable fact. It's one of the things that people say that, what do you mean evolution is not a theory, it's a fact? It's true, evolution is science, it meets the definition of a fact, but they're talking about a different type of evolution, talking about microevolution within the same species. So too, radishes are not the same radishes as 1,000 years ago, and onions are not the same onions as 1,000 years ago. Okay, allowing lemon juice, the fats from the first one that got mixed in their bottle and shishim, why is it up like the fresh foods? And it could be you'll be eating one of the first pieces which has fat from the knife. Every case where you have a tarubas, the emissaries, this question is a very good question, but it belongs to Hilchos Tarubas. The Ramah is saying that the first pieces got bottled in the later pieces. That's what it says, harbe b'yachad. Okay, but somebody ended up eating the first piece. So who was the unlucky one that ended up eating the first piece? That's the din of bittul. And what happens if you have a tichas and you have bittul bereiv? You have a piece of nevela with reiv chatichas shel heter. So somebody ends up eating the nevela, but the din is it's mutter. The din is it's mutter because it's a tarub. That's the whole din of tarubas, is that you have an issa mixed into heter. Otherwise, there's even if there's bittul b'shishim, there's an issa that's being consumed. So say it's bottle. You have some case bottle where it's more nicker. So you have, even when they're chatichos, you have a din of bittul. There's a fork like a knife. Okay, so if you can get Faher, I still don't have a final answer from them about how the Havineni Faher is going to work. Who's going to Faher aside from me? But according to them, yes, a fork is like a knife, but it's very controversial. Kibaltim a basic fork is not like a knife. One thing you have to be careful about cleaning a fork, but anyway, there are days that say it's like it. It seems that a lot of the Svarim, the later, the Heintige Svarim on Bosor, a lot of people quoting this din that a fork has in Tuchka, but it's controversial. Why do you need to wash after the lefis? I guess we don't assume that if you slice it once that it became clean. We're worried about Pashas, we're worried about the mamoshes. We're worried about the mamoshes, which is on the surface of the knife. So therefore you're going to need hadacha. I believe that's the reason. Okay. That was a mouthful. Anyway, but these are very, very negated to kedina. I mean, and like I say, this is the whole Indian of Eina Ben Yemei makes everything so much more, raises the ante, so to speak. To treif up a kitchen, if you have a kosher, if you have an Isser that got in, a treif a keli came in, the goyim did something there, then it's different. We don't have nat barnat, we have all different things we have problems with. But otherwise, you have nat barnat, you have different sorts of heterim, klisheni, all different sorts of heterim to use. I'll say lechatchila, you certainly have to be machmer, and b'diavad sometimes also you'll every once in a while get a keli which is going to be aser. But in most cases, people are not, putting macaroni and cheese into the cholent pot. The real cases that you're going to have, and even if they did, and it's the ben yemei, you to do the Isser by Sunday, but otherwise it's finished. Zayin ben Yemi after Shabbos. Okay, but so to really treif up a kitchen, yeah, you can have you can end up with treif kelim in your kitchen, but the quickest way to do it is with dover chad, because they're all in Zayin ben Yemi, it can make such big tzaddis forever. There's no statute of limitations on Zayin ben Yemi. And that's why it's so important to be careful. Frankly, I don't know. My house, everybody uses parva kalim. So that's, and you have another problem. You have 3 sets of kalim instead of 2 sets of kalim. But the people that grew up that way, so they know. They put an onion in the fridge and they label it, whether it's milchik or fleishik, or people are supposed to know. I don't know how they know. I don't know how they do it. But they say that's the best way to do it. So whichever way you grew up doing it, the best way to do it is the way they do it in your house. The Balabasta figured out the best way to do it. You just have to understand the way she does it, and you also have to make sure she knows the dinner. So this chumrah, for example, on the cutting boards and food processors and things like that, and that's is something that is very important they learn. Okay, Rabbi say. So Mitzvah Shem, I will be mashlim the missing recording and send out a link. Hopefully it'll be before the next year. And we make a shtickle asiyim next week in Mitzvah Shem. We'll bring a kos mashka. Okay. Sei gesund, Rabbi.
Thank you.